Chapter 268. Go to watch net. Zhang Tianhe looked at Zi Yuan, his eyes full of amazement and admiration. He formed a palm with one hand and said, Amitbao. Jinren Zi Yuan, please. Zi Yuan walked up to the crowd and said in a clear voice, thank you for allowing me to speak in front of everyone. Go to watch net. 3 shui, 4 net. An admirer in the crowd immediately said loudly, Jinren Zi Yuan, you can keep talking if you want. We're happy to listen. As soon as the man finished speaking, the crowd burst into laughter. Zi Yuan smiled slightly and said calmly, just now, I saw that you were arguing with Jinren Li and decided to decide this matter by winning or losing, but have you thought about it? How should we decide the outcome? Are we going to swarm them all at once? Or should we take turns? Someone in the crowd shouted, if we rush up together, even if this guy is really an immortal, he will be squeezed to death by us. Zi Yuan nodded and said with a smile, that's right. This will ruin the reputation of our major sections. If word gets out that so many of us have joined hands to bully one person, it will be a joke. After she finished speaking, someone else immediately replied, Fairy, you're right. If so many of us go up together, we'll be giving him too much face. Zi Yuan smiled and said, but if we take turns one by one, there are more than 100 of us here. How long will it take to fight? Are we going to set up a stall here and fight on the field while we eat and sleep off the field? Everyone burst into laughter, and Li Yundong couldn't help but chuckle. He said, I don't think you brought any dry food. Don't eat up Mount Tianlong and leave only a pile of yellow and white things. There's no need to fight anymore. It stinks to death. After he finished speaking, the people on the field laughed even harder. For a moment, the tense atmosphere dissipated a lot. Zi Yuan glanced at him, but the smile on her face was pulled down. She said with a frosty face, you're just a nobody. How dare you interfere in the affairs of so many sects? Do you really think you're the Jade Emperor? If you really want to stand out, then let me tell you, we have so many sects here, can you handle them all? Although he knew that she was acting, he couldn't help but mutter in his heart, damn, this fairy sister changes her face so fast. Li Yundong cupped his hands and said loudly, I, Li Yundong, am willing to fight with anyone from the major sects. As he spoke, he pointed at the line drawn by the fan of 7 treasures and said, as long as I can cross this line, I lose. When everyone heard this, they immediately burst into an uproar. Each of them thought, this kid is too arrogant. He actually drew such a rule. Isn't it easy to cross this line? Furthermore, he didn't say how he would win. Could it be that he was so confident? Seeing that Li Yundong had made this rule, Zi Yuan was slightly stunned, and then quickly cast him a look of admiration. She thought to herself, he's smart. He knows not to kill too much, so as not to make too many enemies in the future and make it difficult for him to do anything. Watch net. 7 KOM. Zi Yuan was very cooperative and said, since Jinren Li has made this rule, we will accept it. What do you think? As she spoke, she turned around. The cultivators who admired her from the major sects all shouted, Jinren Zi Yuan, whatever you say. Zi Yuan said again, since it's a fight, even if it's a gentle fight, there's a possibility of injury and death. What do you think? She then said, since it's a fight, even if it's a gentle fight, there's still a possibility of injury and death. This is the so-called fists and feet have no eyes. There have been too many killings today. Why don't we each elect a person with the strongest cultivation method to compete? If he loses, he will automatically withdraw. What do you think? Some of the more experienced and prudent people faintly felt that something was wrong, but they couldn't tell what was wrong. After all, they didn't believe that this nobody could defeat so many people here alone. They pondered for a while and didn't speak for a while. Zi Yuan turned her head and said to Zhang Tianhe, what do you think, Jinren Zhang? Zhang Tianhe knew that although it was nominally the 6 great sects besieging the Fox Zen school, in fact, more than a dozen sects had come. Of course, he didn't believe that Li Yundong could challenge more than a dozen people by himself. He said with a smile, "That's just right. It'll save us from being talked about." As he said this, he said to Li Yundong, "Did you hear me clearly?" Li Yundong smiled slightly and didn't waste any time. He cupped his hands and said, "Who's first?" Du Fei of the Chuanjian Dragon sect immediately jumped into the field and sneered. "I'll do it. Boy, today I'll show you the power of our Chuanjian Dragon sect." Du Fei was dressed in a tang suit. He shouted and swung his arm. With a whoosh, a Jingu bang came out of his sleeve and hit the ground with a thud, causing the ground to tremble slightly. Du Fei took a deep breath and bent his body. He pressed one hand on the end of the stick and the other on the 7-inch part of the stick. He was quite tall and his arms were very long. When he stretched out his body, he really stretched out his arms like an ape and was eager to try. Li Yundong saw that the tip of the Jingu bang was shaking slightly, like a poisonous snake that could attack at any time. He was secretly shocked and his eyes fell on the other side's shoulder. His feet were standing on the edge of the long line, motionless. Seeing that Li Yundong was standing behind the long line, Du Fei narrowed his eyes slightly. When he opened them again, his eyes were shining brightly. With a loud shout, he swung the Jingu bang in his hand. In an instant, the Jingu bang grew nearly 1 or 2 meters long. It became like a huge iron hammer, fiercely smashing toward Li Yundong. Li Yundong was suddenly shocked. He grabbed the fan of 7 treasures beside him, turned around, and dodged the stick. Then, he lifted his hand and knocked the Jingu bang away with a clang. These 2 weapons were both magic weapons made of black iron, which were heavy and heavy. When they collided, the buzzing sound shook the eardrums of everyone present. Du Fei's stick was knocked away, and he immediately turned over. As he turned over, the Jingu bang suddenly became shorter and hid behind him, making it impossible for people to know where his next blow would come from. Go to the net. 7 KOM. Color asterisk caret and text learn % super hashtag speed. Li Yundong saw a burst of golden light coming toward him. Without thinking, he immediately shook his wrist and opened the fan of 7 treasures in his hand, blocking in front of him like a solid iron wall. Li Yundong saw a burst of golden light coming toward him. Without thinking, he immediately shook his wrist, and the fan of 7 treasures in his hand opened with a swoosh, blocking in front of him like a solid iron wall. Du Fei's move was evolved from the back spear move. It was extremely stealthy, and the Jingu bang in his hand could be short or long, big or small. With this move, countless cultivators had been defeated by this move. It could be said to be his proud killer move. But Li Yundong didn't care about reason at all. He didn't care where it came from or where it was going. He just blocked an iron wall in front of him, completely blocking his body, and easily blocked the blow. Du Fei was so angry that he wanted to vomit blood. He thought to himself, this guy's powerful magical weapon is so overbearing that I have to divert it. After thinking about it, he suddenly threw the Jingu bang in his hand into the air. The Jingu bang jumped into the air and attacked Li Yundong from all directions. After this powerful magical weapon launched an autonomous attack, although its power was far less than when it was in Du Fei's hand, its dexterity was a little faster. Moreover, it came and went like lightning, and the attack was like a tide. It was so fast that people could not react to it at all. Li Yundong was a little tired of dealing with it. After blocking a few times, Li Yundong simply threw out the fan of 7 treasures in his hand. For a moment, the fan of 7 treasures was like a flood dragon entering the sea. It immediately rushed toward Du Fei's Jingu bang aggressively. The 2 magical weapons were fighting fiercely in midair. A golden light and a black light were tangled into a ball, clanging sounds and sparks flying everywhere. Du Fei saw that Li Yundong had thrown out the powerful magical weapon in his hand. Seeing that Li Yundong's hands were empty and there was no powerful magical weapon to resist, he was overjoyed. He quickly pinched his fingers and shouted, "Go!" With a whoosh, a 3-foot-long sword flew out from behind him. It broke through the air, fast and fierce. When it first flew out, it was just a sword, but when it flew in the air, it changed into 2, and then 4. When it fell, it had already covered the area 7 or 8 meters around Li Yundong, as if it was raining swords. The disciples of the Chuanjian dragon sect all cheered and said loudly, "Senior brother Du, what a good move, flying swords like rain. Good job." Those from other sects who were knowledgeable also secretly nodded and thought, although the Chuanjian dragon sect has gone from prosperity to decline and is far from as glorious as when Qiu Chuji was the leader, a centipede dies but never falls down. There are still some good people in the sect. Li Yunyang saw such a terrifying sword rain falling on his head, and the fan of 7 treasures was entangled by the opponent's powerful magical weapon. Although he could retreat to avoid it, once he retreated, the opponent would immediately come forward and cross the long line, and he would lose. Seeing that the long sword was about to pierce through him, Li Yundong suddenly took a step forward and jumped to a place 4 or 5 meters away. He suddenly raised the 2 3-legged bronze tripods placed in the yin-yang tai chi pattern that weighed 1,000 pounds. As soon as he lifted the bronze tripod, he heard a clanging sound above his head. Obviously, the sword rain above his head had been blocked by the big bronze tripod. Everyone on the scene was shocked to see that Li Yundong had such great strength. He had raised the big bronze tripod to block the attack that could be said to be a sure hit. Seeing that he had been blocked by Li Yundong, Du Fei was angry. Just as he was about to pinch his fingers to drive the flying sword again, Li Yundong suddenly waved the bronze tripod and slapped its abdomen with his palm. With a clang, the ash that had accumulated in the bronze tripod, which was more than a foot thick, suddenly sprayed toward Du Fei like a sharp arrow. Du Fei was caught off guard. He only had time to hold his breath and close his eyes. Immediately, he turned into a gray man. For a moment, the scene was filled with smoke and dust, and the cultivators around covered their noses and dodged to the side. Du Fei waved his sleeves and brushed away the ash in front of him. When he opened his eyes, he suddenly took a deep breath. He was shocked to see that Li Yundong had thrown the bronze tripod, which weighed more than 1,000 pounds, at him. At this time, the cultivators behind him were all shocked and scattered to both sides like birds and beasts. After Li Yundong threw out a big bronze tripod, he immediately jumped to the side of another big bronze tripod and kicked it in the abdomen, sending it flying into the air. Then he pounced on Du Fei. Du Fei saw that the big bronze tripod was coming at him so fiercely that he couldn't dodge it at all. He could only grit his teeth, spread out his arms, and put his palms in front of him, ready to take it head-on. There was a muffled clang. As soon as Du Fei caught the big bronze tripod, he felt as if his arms had been hit by a speeding train. There was a cracking sound of bones coming from his arms, as if his bones were going to be broken in the next second. However, Du Fei was the eldest Shixiang of the Chuanjian dragon sect after all, and his cultivation was high. At this moment, he gritted his teeth and took a deep breath when it was impossible for him to take a deep breath. Then, he spun his feet and instantly transferred the strength from his arms to his feet. With a rumble, the ground beneath his feet suddenly caved in. This force forcefully smashed the bluestone ground into a small pit. After Du Fei removed the force, he did not stop at all. He exerted his strength and threw the big bronze tripod in his arms at Li Yundong. Seeing that the other party had thrown the big copper cauldron back, Li Yundong didn't stop at all. Suddenly, his body bent down, and his whole body seemed to be stuck to the ground. The big copper cauldron made a whistling sound and passed over his scalp. But when the big bronze tripod flew over his back, Li Yundong suddenly straightened his waist and arched his back. With a clang, the big bronze tripod flew behind him, and he used the strength of his waist to do a somersault. In midair, his hand accurately grabbed one of the legs of the big bronze tripod that was spinning in the air, and then he swung it fiercely toward Du Fei's face. This time, Li Yundong bent down to dodge, straightened his waist, turned over, and caught the big bronze tripod in the air, smashing it toward Du Fei like a hammer. This series of movements was like a rushing torrent, smooth and smooth. In the blink of an eye, it reflected Li Yundong's extraordinary fighting talent and human-like reaction. Everyone in the field saw Li Yundong smashing toward Du Fei. If it hit, even an Iron Man would be instantly turned into a mass of meat paste. They couldn't help but exclaim. Du Fei only felt his vision go black. A big bronze tripod was smashing toward him. He had no time to dodge at all. There was only a subconscious thought in his mind, it's over. I'm going to die here today. But the big bronze tripod, which weighed 1,000 pounds, was about to hit Du Fei with the force of a thunderbolt. Li Yundong suddenly twisted his waist and abruptly stopped the big bronze tripod in midair. Everyone saw that the extremely terrible 500-pound bronze tripod had been stopped by Li Yundong as if it were light. His whole body changed from moving to still, like a statue. The 500-pound bronze tripod in his hand did not move at all. Only the incense ash pouring out of the tilted bronze tripod continued to fall on Du Fei's head. Although Du Fei's body was covered in incense ash, his eyes were wide open as he stared at the big bronze tripod less than an inch above his head. He was so shocked that his face was ashen and he was sweating profusely. He didn't dare to blink. Only the incense ash kept falling from the top of his head, making him look funny. But at this time, there was silence in the field. No one dared to laugh. Li Yundong leaned forward, still maintaining the posture of smashing people, motionless. At this time, he straightened his waist behind him, and the big copper tripod that had flown out landed precisely on one of the yin-yang patterns in the field, making a muffled sound. Li Yundong asked in a deep voice, "Do you admit defeat?" Du Fei felt as if his throat was burning. He said in a dry voice, "I admit defeat." Li Yundong asked again, "Do you admit defeat?" Du Fei nodded and said respectfully and fearfully, "I admit defeat." Li Yundong nodded and didn't even look at him. He spun his feet, turned his body, and shook his arm, throwing the 500-pound bronze tripod in his hand. Li Yundong patted the scattered incense ash in his hand and said in a clear voice, "Since you admit defeat, that's good. Next." As soon as he finished speaking, he heard the big bronze tripod flying behind him land precisely on another dot of the yin-yang pattern, as if the two big bronze tripods had not moved at all. For a moment, the field was extremely quiet. Everyone looked at Li Yundong in shock. No one spoke. They all had the same thought in their minds: this bronze tripod was more than 500 kilograms, and it had been so fierce just now that it had more than a few thousand kilograms of force. He had actually lifted it as if it were light and stopped at will. This kind of cultivation is really terrifying. Who the hell is this guy? /OM/4527-894-1954 Chapter 269. Go to watch net. The copper cauldron that Li Yundong had thrown into the air hit the ground with a muffled thud, and everyone's hearts trembled. Go to watch net. 7 KOM 113 Shui 4 net. The cultivators of the major sects looked at Li Yundong with their mouths agape, as if they were looking at a monkey who had jumped out of a crack in a stone. They couldn't understand where this guy had come from and how could he be so powerful. After a long time, some of them came to their senses. They took a deep breath and exclaimed, "Amazing! Which sect is this guy from? Why haven't I heard of him before? Strong, he's really strong." Some young cultivators who were not very experienced in fighting whispered to each other, "This person is really amazing. Could it be that he was born with divine strength?" Some older and more experienced Xixiang and Shiji took the opportunity to say to their junior brothers and sisters, there are almost no cultivators in this world who are born with divine strength. You see, his strength is great because his cultivation is deep and his foundation is solid. The qi all over his body is condensed into steel, so his jinqi is vigorous. It's impossible to pick up such a heavy thing with human strength alone, let alone lifting it as if it were light. You must wrap this cauldron with jinqi, then mobilize the qi of your kidneys and liver, and activate the power in your body. Only by combining the two can you do it. The young cultivator suddenly understood. So that's how it is. It doesn't seem difficult. In this case, I can also do it. The older cultivator said earnestly, there are many people who can do this, but there are very few who can fight back and control the enemy at that moment. Look at Li Yundong. He was in a place where he was almost doomed to die, but he knew how to adapt to the local conditions and use the local materials to turn defeat into victory. This is amazing ability. The cultivators of the various sects were whispering to each other. Wan Honglin couldn't help tugging at Zi Yuan's sleeve and whispering, Sister Zi Yuan, this guy has become so powerful. He's so strong, even stronger than before. Zi Yuan's expression didn't change, but there was a gratified look in her eyes. She looked at the field and said in a low voice, he has passed the divine tribulation. Naturally, he will soar into the sky and amaze everyone. I believe that after this battle, the name Li Yundong will become famous in the cultivation world. Wan Honglin was envious and jealous. She looked at Li Yundong with admiration and jealousy. She pouted and snorted. Let's see if this guy can survive the next round of battles. At this time, Li Yundong walked back to the long line he had drawn before. He cupped his hands and said in a clear voice, I was lucky to win just now. I wonder who wants to give me some advice in the next round. As soon as he spoke, the whispers in the hall immediately stopped, and everyone looked at each other in dismay. Watch net. Colorful articles. Learn, net. Super_speed. More. New originally, some young and vigorous cultivators who thought that they were good wanted to step forward, but when they saw the fight between Li Yundong and Du Fei, they immediately became cowards and refused to go out. As for some other very powerful and experienced cultivators, they secretly muttered to themselves, wondering if they should go out and fight. It would be good if they won, but if they lost, they would be unable to raise their heads in the future. It would be a big loss. For a moment, all the sects were a little timid, but then they saw a tall and thin man walk out. The man was wearing a wide and long Taoist robe and a necromancer's hat on his head. His eyebrows were long and thin, and the corners of his eyebrows were raised. The corners of his mouth were drooping, as if his mother had just died, and his face was full of sadness. He was holding a wooden sword in one hand, and his whole body was like a kite in the wind, waiting for a gust of wind to blow him away. The man walked to the field, cupped his hands, and said, I'm Zhao Wuji from Fangzhen sect. Before he could finish his words, the cultivators of the major sects on the field suddenly burst into laughter. Fangzhen sect? What kind of sect is this? I've never heard of it. Zhao Wuji, what a scary name. Hey, man, is your wooden sword okay? Is it a peachwood sword? You should go catch ghosts and draw talismans. Don't embarrass yourself here. Zhao Wuji ignored them and said slowly to Li Yunyang, Zhenrenli, I don't have much ability. Only the wooden sword in my hand is a powerful magical weapon that can barely be seen. I also know that I'm not a match for you. Why don't you let my Dharma treasure fight against your Dharma treasure? Whoever's Dharma treasure wins. How about it? Before Li Yundong could say anything, the cultivators of the other sects burst out laughing. Brother, are you kidding me? Take your broken wooden sword and fight with the fan of 7 treasures. In my opinion, this wooden sword will break in less than 2 rounds. Li Yundong heard the ridicule of the crowd, but he saw that Zhao Wuji didn't take it seriously at all. He was secretly shocked and thought, if he doesn't have 30%, he wouldn't dare to go up to Liangshan. This person must have something up his sleeve. Li Yundong smiled and said, okay. After that, he threw the fan of 7 treasures into the sky. Watch net. 7K0- the fan of 7 treasures suddenly jumped into the air, and with a swoosh, all the leaves opened. The golden Sanskrit characters on each leaf emitted a dazzling golden light, which was dazzling even in broad daylight. Zhao Wuji saw the fan of 7 treasures emitting a golden brilliance in mid-air, as if it was inviting him to fight. He also took a deep breath and muttered something. He put his finger in his mouth and bit hard. After biting the tip of his finger, he smeared the blood on the wooden sword. In an instant, the wooden sword suddenly came to life and began to wriggle, as if it was desperately sucking Zhao Wuji's blood. Zhao Wuji's face became more and more miserable, and his 2 eyebrows drooped even more. Zheng Yuan, the leader of the Yin-Yang sect in Mount Wuhua, was the oldest cultivator here, as well as the most experienced and knowledgeable cultivator. When he saw that the sword was sucking blood, he suddenly cried out in horror, "Jiuyin locust wood sword." The cultivators who were close to him turned their heads to look at him, as if they didn't understand what kind of powerful magical weapon the Jiuyin locust wood sword was. Ding Nan was very good at reading people's expressions, so she immediately asked obediently, "Master, what is the Jiuyin locust wood sword?" "I've only heard of peachwood swords, but I've never heard of locust wood swords. Can locust wood also be used to make magical weapons?" Zheng Yuan was very satisfied with Ding Nan's cleverness. He glanced at her and thought to himself, Ping'er has become a lot smarter after returning from the dead in this body. Zheng Yuan stroked his beard and said, "Why do you think peachwood swords can be used to make long swords, and many Taoists use them to catch ghosts?" How could Ding Nan know this? She was afraid that she would be exposed, so she deliberately acted like a spoiled child and said, "Master, don't keep me guessing. Just tell me directly." Zheng Yuan liked her trick very much. Without suspecting anything, he said, "Because peach wood is a natural young object, and ghosts are yin things in the world. Naturally, one thing can restrain the other. Therefore, peachwood swords can be used to restrain otherworldly items. But locust wood is different. Locust wood is a natural young object." Ding Nan asked in confusion, "Why is that?" Zheng Yuan was a prideful person. At this time, he only cared about showing off. He thought that Ding Nan was deliberately asking this to cooperate with him. He didn't expect that she really didn't know. He laughed and said, "Think about it. What is the word ghost next to the tree? It's the word locust on the locust tree. Ghosts are the most yin in the world, and they like to stay in yin places the most. Locust trees are naturally yin, so ghosts are often accompanied by locust trees, making them even more yin. This Jiuyin locust wood sword can not only absorb ghosts for its own use, but also constantly absorb people's yang qi to feed the ghosts in the sword. Look at Zhao Wuji, who is so thin and has a sad face. It's the result of the yang qi in his body being absorbed." Ding Nan was shocked and asked, "Then why does this person still use this magical weapon? Isn't he courting death?" Zheng Yuan laughed and said, "This Jiuyin locust wood sword is extremely domineering and powerful. If you get it, any ordinary cultivator can become a great master. How can it be so easy to give up?" As he was speaking, the 9-yin locust wood sword in Zhao Wuji's hand had already absorbed enough fresh blood and yang energy. It suddenly let out a shrill and cold shriek, like the long cry of an owl. It was so piercing that it made everyone's hair stand on end, their hair standing on end. The 9-yin locust wood sword struggled with all its might in Zhao Wuji's hand. It was like a crazed ghost that wanted to pounce on its target. The sight of it would make anyone who saw it feel a chill run down their spine. But Zhao Wuji still did not let go. Instead, he took another deep breath and blew it at the locust wood sword. Ding Nan saw the locust wood sword twisting like a snake, and ferocious faces constantly appeared on it. Although she was horrified, she still asked, "Why is he still breathing?" Zheng Yuan stroked his beard and nodded slightly. This Zhao Wuji knows the principle of starting with a drum of courage, weakening by the second, and exhausting by the third. He is quite clever. This principle is the same as cockfighting. The sharp-eyed cockfighting on his side is already eager to try, but he still refuses to let it go. Instead, he doubles down on it. Once it goes on the field, it will be unstoppable. As soon as he finished speaking, he saw that the fan of 7 treasures was a little impatient in the air, and the light emitted by the golden characters weakened a little. At this time, Zhao Wuji suddenly let go of his hand. The Jiuyin locust wood sword in his hand flew into the air like lightning and rushed toward the fan of 7 treasures. After the Jiuyin locust wood sword flew into the air, it constantly released grayish-black smoke. This smoke turned into ghosts and ghosts one after another, rushing toward the fan of 7 treasures like a tide. Some cultivators asked in confusion, "This fan of 7 treasures is a powerful magical weapon of Yang, and it also has the power of Buddha. Isn't it courting death if the Jiuyin locust wood sword attacks it with yin qi?" Immediately, someone shook his head and said, "As the saying goes, the devil is 10 times stronger than the Taoist. Yin and Yang reinforce and subdue each other. It's not that Yang can subdue Yin, but Yin can also subdue Yang. It just depends on who has a higher level of cultivation and will win." At this time, everyone in the field raised their heads and watched the battle between the powerful magical weapons in the air. The fan of 7 treasures was suddenly attacked fiercely by the 9 locust wood sword. In its shock and anger, golden light shone brightly. Golden Sanskrit characters floated out one after another, forming a Vajra warrior with 3 heads and 6 arms. It fought with the many resentful ghosts. The Jiuyin locust wood sword was not to be outdone. The grayish-black smoke it released also condensed into a huge black Rakshasa with 3 heads and 6 arms. It held a trident and an alms bowl and fought with the Vajra again. Everyone in the field watched intently, afraid that the outcome of the 2 magical weapons, one yin and one yang, would be decided in the next second. Li Yundong also frowned slightly and clenched his fists. For a moment, the golden light and the black light twisted into a ball. In the beginning, the golden light on Tianlong Mountain was extremely dazzling, and sometimes it was covered with dark clouds. When the battle reached its climax, the 2 lights had already twisted together. There was no way to tell who was who. There was a black light in the golden light, and there was a golden light in the black light. The colors were strange, and it was difficult to tell who was who. After fighting for a while, Zhao Wuji suddenly bit his tongue and spat out a mouthful of blood into the air. The Jiuyin locust wood sword, which had been fighting with the fan of 7 treasures, suddenly seemed to have gained an additional force. It suppressed the fan of 7 treasures, and the black Rakshasa beat the Vajra warrior until it was forced to retreat. At this time, Li Yundong frowned. The cultivators of the various sects also shook their heads and said, "The fan of 7 treasures is going to lose. The yang qi is suppressed by the yin qi, so it will definitely lose, /OM/ for 527-894-1954. Chapter 270. Go to watch net. However, just as the yang qi and Buddhist powers of the fan of 7 treasures were suppressed by the yin qi and ghostly powers of the 9 locust tree wood sword, a black fog suddenly surged out of the fan of 7 treasures. At the same time, many ferocious and malicious ghosts pounced towards the Rakshasa to devour it. Go to watch net. 113 Learning 4 net. The black Rakshasa was momentarily unable to react. Its entire body was covered in a layer of thin and small malicious ghosts. It was like a lion with man-eating ants crawling all over its body. Immediately, it roared angrily. When the golden warrior of the fan of 7 treasures saw that the other party's attacks had stopped, it immediately counterattacked. It threw the Vajra in its hand at the other party. The Black Rakshasa was originally on par with the Golden Warrior. Previously, it was because Zhao Wuji had suddenly used his blood to nourish the ghosts that the nine-in locust tree wood sword had suddenly gained strength. It no longer held back as it attacked the other party, causing the Golden Warrior to retreat. However, such a thing could not happen again. When the ghosts refined by the fan of 7 treasures suddenly attacked, the Black Rakshasa was immediately restrained. It was like an arrow at the end of its flight and could no longer fight to a draw with the Golden Warrior. Instantly, the situation was reversed. All the cultivators present were dumbfounded. No one could understand how a Dharma artifact like the Fan of 7 Treasures, which was dignified, had deep Buddhist powers, and extremely heavy yang qi, could refine ghosts and use them. Before long, the Black Rakshasa's limbs and head were finally grabbed by the Golden Warrior's 6 arms. Then, with a forceful tug, it was torn into several pieces. The Black Rakshasa also turned into countless vengeful ghosts that fled in all directions. The 9-in locust tree wood sword was also sliced into 2 by the Fan of 7 Treasures. With a thud, it fell to the ground like 2 pieces of wood. At that moment, Zhao Wuji's expression was ashen as he laughed bitterly. "I've lost." With that, he spat out a mouthful of blood and fell backward. A kind-hearted cultivator wanted to help him up, but Zhao Wuji staggered to his feet, pushed them away, and staggered away. For a moment, after watching Zhao Wuji leave, everyone looked at Li Yunyang in unison. They were secretly frightened in their hearts. The Fan of 7 Treasures is already an extremely powerful magical weapon, but it has refined the Yin Soul Qi. The masculine Buddhist power and the cold ghost power are like water and fire. I really don't know how Zhenrenli combined the 2 into one. Miraculous, truly miraculous. This time, the battle of magical treasures was like a war between 2 armies. From the beginning, they challenged each other, to probing each other, until they were evenly matched. Then, Zhao Wuji was in trouble, and the 9-in locust tree sword gained the upper hand. Finally, the psychic Fan of 7 Treasures suddenly counterattacked from an impossible place, turning the tide of the battle. This was truly a series of twists and turns, incomparably thrilling. Some of the cultivators in the arena who only wanted to watch the show were greatly satisfied. Some of the older cultivators thought to themselves, if I had fought with Zhao Wuji just now, would my powerful magical treasure have been able to win? After thinking about it, they came to the conclusion that 9 out of 10 of them would not have been able to. They couldn't help but be more afraid of Li Yunyang, who had won. Li Yunyang had won 2 games in a row, but his face was not very happy. He cupped his hands to the crowd and said, "I was lucky to win another game. I wonder which master is willing to teach me." After he shouted, the cultivators of the various sects looked at each other, and no one spoke. "Go to the internet." Li Yundong shouted again. For a moment, no one answered except for his voice. Just when everyone was silent, a short bald man suddenly jumped out and shouted, "F***CK, I'll play with you." Li Yundong looked over and saw that the man was less than 1.6 meters tall. He was sturdy, like a weight that had become a spirit. Li Yundong cupped his hands and said with a smile, "Well, what should I call you?" The short bald man rubbed his shiny head and said loudly, "What do you mean by, Your Excellency? What era are you in? Why are you still speaking in such a genteel manner? I can't stand the way you speak. Listen carefully, I'm Dang Chong from the Penglai sect." Li Yundong smiled slightly and said, "Well, please give me your advice." Dang Chong walked to a place not far from Li Yundong. As he rolled up his sleeves, he said in a loud voice, "Zhenrenli, I want to fight with you. You can't take advantage of me." Li Yundong asked in confusion, "What did I take advantage of you?" Dang Chong pointed to the Fan of 7 Treasures on Li Yundong's back and said, "I don't have any powerful magical weapons like the Fan of 7 Treasures or the Jiuyin Locust Wood Sword. I only have a pair of fists and a pair of feet. How about it, Jinren, let's compete with our fists and feet. I won't use any powerful magical weapons, and you won't use any either. What do you think? After he finished speaking, before Li Yundong could say anything, a disciple of the Fox Zen school who was not seriously injured shouted, "You shameless baldy! You don't have any powerful magical weapons, but our Jinren does. Are you going to let him have powerful magical weapons and not use them? That's right. You're so unreasonable. Jinren, don't be fooled by him." For cultivators, powerful magical weapons were weapons. If they fought with others without weapons in their hands, they would most likely be at a disadvantage. Even the cultivators of the other sex showed disdain on their faces. They thought to themselves, this baldy is so shameless. How dare he use words to mock Li Yundong? However, Li Yundong was proud of his powerful martial arts, so he smiled confidently and said, "Well, I'll fight with you." After saying that, he put the psychic fan of 7 treasures behind him and patted the end of the fan with his palm. With a thud, the psychic fan of 7 treasures sank into the ground like a pile driver. Li Yundong walked to the long line between the 2 big copper tripods and stood still. He cupped his hands and said, "Please." After that, he put down his hands and didn't make any gestures. He just fixed his eyes on Dang Chang. Go to see net. 7 K.O.M. Dang Chang saw that Li Yundong was standing in an unkempt manner, but his posture was as steady as a mountain. He had the bearing of a grandmaster. Dang Chang suddenly touched his forehead in surprise and said loudly, "That's strange. You're so young. How did you practice kung fu? Did you start practicing in your mother's womb? Hey, who is your master?" Li Yundong smiled and said, "Do you want to fight or not?" Seeing that Li Yundong was unwilling to tell him, Dang Chang smiled, stood up, and said loudly, "Boy, be careful." After that, he suddenly exerted strength under his feet and threw a blast punch at Li Yundong. Li Yundong saw that although his punch was powerful and heavy, it was not as good as Lin Yu's. He didn't take the opponent's move and punched at the opponent's shoulder. Relying on his longer arm, he actually arrived first. Unexpectedly, just as Li Yundong's fist was about to hit the opponent, Dang Chang suddenly rushed in front of him, opened his mouth, and spat out a fireball, heading straight for Li Yundong's face. Li Yundong was caught off guard. If it weren't for the great increase in his cultivation and the improvement of his foresight and divine sense, his face would have suddenly gone numb the moment Dang Chang opened his mouth. He subconsciously lowered his head, and Li Yundong would have been hit at this time. Li Yundong only felt the back of his head heat up, and the fireball flew past his head. He could even smell the burning smell of his head. Li Yundong was furious. Although he had lowered his head and exposed the back of his head and back to his opponent, he stood on one leg and smashed his other leg like a steel whip in front of Dang Chang, like a scorpion swinging its tail. With a snap, Li Yundong's foot firmly stamped on Dang Chang's face. Dang Chang saw that Li Yundong had dodged his extremely hidden attack and was about to chase after him again, but he was suddenly slapped in the face. He immediately took 2 steps back, wiped his face with both hands, and shouted, "Damn it, what's going on?" At this time, everyone in the field came to their senses. The disciples of the Fox Zen school hissed, "The Pinglai sect is so shameless. We agreed to fight with our fists and feet, but they secretly released magic. Shameless." The senior brothers of the prestigious sects were explaining to their junior brothers and sisters the magic of Li Yundong's lowering his head and flicking his tail just now. After Li Yundong forced Dang Chang back, he also shouted, "Didn't you say that we were going to fight with our fists and feet?" Dang Chang laughed. "I only said that magical items were not allowed to be used. I didn't say that magic was not allowed. Jinren, all is fair in war. If you know how to use magic, you can also use it. Be careful." After that, he spat out another fireball. He spat out a mouthful of fire like a fire dragon, baring its fangs and brandishing its claws as it attacked Li Yundong. Before it reached him, Li Yundong felt a blazing aura blowing on his face, and his head was burned up. Li Yundong frowned secretly. He put his palms together, only his two little fingers were slightly bent inward, and his palms were slightly open. He shouted, "Bang!" It was the heavenly drum Thunder Buddha's handprint. This handprint suddenly struck out, and the fire dragon that was coming toward him suddenly shattered into many fireballs with a bang, scattering everywhere. The crowd suddenly burst into an uproar and exclaimed, "Mantra Mahamudra! This is Buddhist Kung Fu. Is this guy from the immortal and Buddhist sects? Is he from the Wu-Lu sect?" The people in the field whispered to each other, but the fight between the two did not stop. After Li Yundong smashed the fireball with his palm, he stamped his foot on the ground, causing a few scattered candles on the ground to fly into the air. After grabbing them with one hand, Li Yundong quickly rushed toward Dang Chang. When Dang Chang saw Li Yundong rushing over, he immediately took a deep breath. His whole body inflated like a balloon, and then he suddenly spat out a mouthful of fire. This mouthful of fire was several times larger than before. Li Yundong felt all the hair on his body stand on end. He stamped his feet and flipped over Dang Chang's head like a flying swan. However, his hand holding the incense stick reached into the fire and lit all the candles. When he flew over Dang Chang's head, he pressed the incense stick on Dang Chang's head. Suddenly, with a sizzling sound, Dang Chang jumped up with a cry, grabbed his head with both hands, and cursed, "Damn it, what's going on? My head is burning." Everyone saw that Li Yundong had burned several circular scars on Dang Chang's head, and they immediately burst out laughing. "Just right, scars match a bald head. Brother of the Penglai sect, you can find a temple and become a monk. You don't even need to change your clothes." The disciples of the Fox Zen school had been worried that Li Yundong would not be able to handle it, but now that they saw that Li Yundong had defeated 3 people in a row and 3 sects in a row, they were all excited and shouted, genuinely, "Good job! Good lesson!" The Fox Zen school had originally been full of yin and yang. There were many female disciples and few male disciples. Now that the only remaining fake male disciple, Gu Feng, had been killed by Lu Yi, when these women shouted, they were like cheerleaders, and their voices were extremely harsh. The male cultivators of the major sects had strange expressions on their faces. They muttered to themselves, "This guy is really lucky with women. When the time comes, these fox spirits will be taken into the sect together. Won't they be happy? No, no, we can't let this guy take advantage of us like this." Ruan Hongling, who had been full of excitement and joy when she saw Li Yundong win, heard the loud shouts of the female disciples of the Fox Zen school, and her face immediately fell. She snorted and said, "What are you shouting for? A group of demons of the Fox Zen school are born to attract bees and butterflies." At this time, Li Yundong also pointed the incense stick in his hand at Dang Chang and said in a deep voice, "Do you admit defeat?" Dang Chang wanted to bite the bullet and say that he would not admit defeat, but he saw that Li Yundong's eyes were sweeping over his lower body, and the incense stick in his hand was also swaying in the direction of his lower body. He suddenly shivered and thought to himself, "It's okay to have a few burns on the top of my head, but if there are also a few burns on the bottom, how can I be a man?" Dang Chang immediately cupped his hands with an apologetic smile and said, genuinely, "Good kung fu. I'm convinced." After he finished speaking, he walked off the stage. As he walked, he touched the scar on his head and gasped. Li Yundong threw away the incense stick in his hand and walked back to the long line. He cupped his hands and said loudly, "Who else?" At this time, if Li Yundong counted the 2 people he had killed before, he had already won 5 games in a row. The methods he used to win each game were different. There was the magical heavenly Jindan technique, magical weapon fighting, close combat, and even the Buddhist Mahamudra Kung Fu. The cultivators of the various sects present felt that Li Yundong was like a huge treasure vault, with endless means that he had not used yet. What was terrifying was that this young man was too strong on the spot. They really didn't know whether he was using it regularly or just normally. When Li Yundong first appeared, everyone was still full of disdain, especially when he had first challenged the major sections. The cultivators of the major sects had disdained to break through the long line drawn by Li Yundong. Instead, they had chosen to fight him head-on and defeat him head-on. The pride and conceit of the righteous sects deep in their hearts could be seen from this. However, after Li Yundong won a few games in a row, his momentum soared, and everyone was more and more in awe of him. A few cultivators from the 6 sects who were on good terms with each other secretly whispered to each other. One of them, who was taller, whispered, "This monkey's son is really powerful. Do you have a chance of winning if you fight him head-on?" The others shook their heads. The tall one said in a low voice, "Since he said before that we would lose if we fight in the long line, then let's take turns to attack him. I don't believe that we can't break through that long line if we take turns." After he finished speaking, someone next to him hesitated and said, "But if we win in such an unfair way, it won't sound good in the future." The tall one sneered and said, "There's no one who can defeat him now, and you're still thinking about this. Do you want the limelight to be stolen by this guy? At that time, if Zhenren Zhang of the Zhenyi school takes action, our 6 great sects will have nothing to do." His words immediately moved the others. They looked at each other and nodded to themselves. The tall one was overjoyed and said, "Then I'll take the lead. Let this guy have a good look at the power of our 6 great sects together, /om/ for 527-894-1954. Chapter 271. Go to watch net. The tall man jumped to the middle of the field, 10 meters away from the long line under Li Yundong's feet. He cupped his hands and said loudly, "I'm Zhang Hongqing from the Jinshan sect. Zhenrenli, please give me some advice." After that, he didn't wait for Li Yundong to return the salute. With a stomp of his feet, he dove into the ground in an instant. Before the people on the field had time to shout, they saw the ground bulge slightly and quickly pounce on Li Yundong. Go to watch net. Li Yunyang hadn't expected that the other party would use the earth escape technique to sneak into the ground and run toward him. He frowned secretly and shouted loudly. His body suddenly jumped up, and his whole body smashed toward the other party's path like a meteorite. With a loud bang, Li Yundong stepped on a deep pit in Zhang Hongqing's path. Zhang Hongqing's way forward was blocked. He immediately bypassed Li Yundong and quickly ran toward the long line behind him. Li Yundong hadn't expected that the other party would choose to bypass him instead of fighting with him. He suddenly turned his head and saw an arc visible to the naked eye rising from the ground. In the blink of an eye, he had rushed to the vicinity of the long line. Only then did Li Yundong understand the other party's plan. He immediately moved and returned to the vicinity of the long line like lightning. He pinched a fixed fundamental seal with both hands, shouted loudly, and slammed his palm toward the ground. With a loud bang, the ground paved with blue bricks suddenly surged like waves. Zhang Hongqing only felt that the ground he was hiding in was like a carpet that had been forcefully shaken by someone. An extremely strong force came from above and violently shook him out of the ground. Li Yundong slammed the ground with the fixed fundamental seal and forced Zhang Hongqing out. He immediately kicked the big copper tripod beside him with the tip of his foot and turned it upside down. Then, he grabbed it with one hand, like a bowl, and firmly buckled Zhang Hongqing in it. Zhang Hongqing saw that Li Yundong had actually used this big copper tripod to buckle him. He sneered secretly. "Can you trap me with this?" Just as he was about to continue using the earth escape method, Li Yunyang suddenly pinched a Mahamudra and slapped it hard on the outside of the big copper tripod. With a buzzing sound, Zhang Hongqing was shocked to the point that his whole body was numb, and his eardrums were bleeding. Zhang Hongqing immediately let out a blood-curdling scream and covered his ears with his hands. Not to mention a spell, he couldn't even resist it with his chi. However, Li Yundong slapped out another Mahamudra from outside and slapped it hard on the big copper tripod, leaving a palm print and causing the big copper tripod to make a muffled sound. Zhang Hongqing was almost scared out of his wits in this big bronze cauldron. He screamed in pain, "Stop hitting, I admit defeat, I admit defeat." Li Yundong snorted, then with a kick of his toes, he flipped the big copper tripod over, and it fell to the side with a thud. But before he had time to speak, he suddenly saw a figure jump out of the field and say quickly, "Chen Anji of the Donghua sect, please advise me." As Chen Anji spoke, he had already rushed near the long line. Although it was a legitimate duel, in reality, it was no different from a sneak attack. Watch net. 7 KOM. Color asterisk caret and text learn % super hashtag speed. Update. Without thinking about it, he immediately made a Mahamudra with both hands and slapped it hard on the big copper tripod, making it fly toward Chen Anji like a cannonball. Chen Anji was very afraid of Li Yundong's speed, so he stayed very far away from Li Yundong, almost sticking to another big bronze tripod. However, when he ran to the front of the big bronze tripod and saw that he could step on the line with one more step, the big bronze tripod that Li Yundong had blasted over smashed over like a cannonball. At this time, if Chen Anji took another step forward, he would immediately be sandwiched between the two cauldrons and be smashed into a meat patty. Chen Anji had no choice but to stop in his tracks. But as soon as he stopped, Li Yundong immediately arrived like a shadow. He waved his hand and grabbed Chen Anji's face. Chen Anji quickly pinched a paper talisman and pointed it at Li Yundong. Quick! The talisman instantly burned by itself. Soon, many grasses and vines grew under Li Yundong's feet, tightly wrapping around his legs. Li Yundong sneered and shouted loudly. The 9 revolutions Xinqi in his body suddenly exploded, and his legs suddenly doubled in size, breaking the vines. Chen Anji was so shocked that his eyeballs almost popped out. Before he could react, Li Yundong's palm pounced on him and sent him flying like a kite. Li Yundong sent Chen Anji flying with a palm. As soon as he turned around, he saw a figure quickly pouncing on the other side of the long line. The previous 2 times, someone had introduced himself. Even if it was Chen Anji's sneak attack, there would be a cover. But this time, not only did he introduce himself, he directly launched a sneak attack. Li Yunyang snorted coldly. He patted one side of the 2 large bronze tripods that were lying flat in front of him. A huge force shook the other large bronze tripod and sent it flying, smashing toward the person who had sneaked up on him. Li Yundong had used the same trick again. He had thought that the opponent would stop, but he hadn't expected that the opponent would not slow down at all. Moreover, when the big copper cauldron hit the opponent's figure, it went straight through. Li Yundong was shocked and thought to himself, is this a Yin spirit? The opponent actually used such a sinister technique like the Yin spirit projection to barge into my line of defense. How shameless! Li Yundong was furious. A stream of qi rushed from his lower abdomen to his chest, and then from his chest to his throat like a torrent. He opened his mouth and let out a shocking roar. Bang! This loud roar had an extremely strong effect of Buddhist mantra. The man's Yin spirit was instantly dispersed, and he disappeared at the edge of the long line in an instant. Watch net. But after Li Yundong's roar, another figure appeared near the long line. The man saw that Li Yundong was far away from him, and he was out of reach. He was in midair, and he only needed to step on the long line to win. He immediately laughed wildly and said, I won. After that, he stepped on the ground. Li Yundong's Xinqi immediately surged out like a mountain torrent. He roared and slammed his palms on the ground, causing the blue bricks on the ground to surge like waves. His Xinqi forcibly controlled the blue bricks on the ground and pulled them back like a carpet. When the man's feet landed, he had stepped steadily on the long line drawn by Li Yundong on the ground, but suddenly the ground surged, and the long line under his feet was forcibly pulled back half a meter. The man had no time to react. When his feet landed on the ground, the long line was half a meter away from him. This distance seemed close, but in his heart, he felt that it was far away. Just as he was shocked, Li Yundong suddenly appeared in front of him, pushed him with his palms, and shouted, "Get out of here." After that, he pushed him away like a cannonball. The man fell into the crowd and only stopped after knocking down several people. He got up angrily and shouted, "You're shameless. Why did you pull this long line?" Li Yundong snorted, sneered, and said disdainfully, "I don't know which sect you are from. Which sect did the previous one belong to?" The subtext of Li Yundong's words was obvious. "How dare you say that I'm shameless? You are much more shameless than me." The man's face turned red. Only then did he know how to be ashamed. He cupped his hands and said, "Well, you win. Our Qingwei sect admits defeat." As he said this, he didn't even bother to say his name and got into the crowd. From the four people's joint attacks to Li Yundong resolving them one by one, it actually took less than a minute. The means used by the cultivators of the four sects were unscrupulous, which could be said to be incredible, but Li Yundong's way of dealing with them was even more stunning. It wasn't until Li Yundong confronted the disciples of the Qingwei sect that they came to their senses. Their faces were full of shock. Some cultivators couldn't care less about their hostility and couldn't help cheering loudly, "Good." This cheer shook the sky, but it was from the sincere admiration of a cultivator from the bottom of his heart. This battle was really as fast as lightning. It was so fast that it was dizzying, and they were so nervous that they couldn't breathe. Just watching the battle from the side made them feel that their eyes were not enough, let alone thinking of ways to break the enemy and adapt to the situation on the spot. However, Li Yundong had come up with all kinds of countermeasures in the blink of an eye, and he had even put them into practice. His methods were magical and his Shintong was so ingenious that it was amazing. They really couldn't help but be convinced. It could be said that Wan Hongling and Zi Yuan had watched Li Yundong succeed in the Zhuji phase and then slowly grow up by cultivating his Shintong bit by bit. But they had never expected that after Li Yundong had passed through the divine tribulation, he would suddenly soar into the sky and amaze everyone. Wan Hongling looked at the young man standing proudly in the field with a face full of shock. For a moment, she found that this face was so strange to her. It was obviously a very familiar face, but she almost didn't dare to recognize it. "Sister Zi Yuan." Wan Hongling said, How did he become so strong? So strong. So powerful." This was not the first time that Wan Hongling had said such words, but it was the first time that she had been shocked by Li Yundong from the bottom of her heart. She could no longer bring up the idea of being enemies with this young man. On the road of cultivation, Wan Hongling witnessed Li Yundong's figure galloping away, leaving her behind in the blink of an eye. At this time, Zi Yuan's face was also full of emotion. She widened her eyes and looked at Li Yundong standing proudly in the field with an almost insufferably arrogant posture. He had defeated 7 masters of 7 sects in a row in one breath, but his face was still flushed, as if the more he fought, the more excited he became. Zheng Yuan, the leader of the Yin-Yang sect in Mount Wuhua, had originally wanted to go to the field to seek justice, but when he saw how strong Li Yundong was, he immediately took a deep breath and began to beat a retreat in his heart. He glanced at Ding Nan beside him and saw that his beloved disciple was looking at Li Yundong with an extremely shocked face. Her eyes were straight and motionless, and her whole body seemed to have been petrified. Zheng Yuan thought that Ding Nan was afraid and desperate because of Li Yundong's strength and felt that there was no hope of revenge, so he comforted her, "Pinger, don't be afraid. I have a few powerful magical weapons that have not been successfully refined. When I go back to the mountain and refine these powerful magical weapons, it will not be a problem to take down this guy." At this time, Ding Nan came back to her senses as if she had just woken up from a dream. She responded blankly, but her eyes were fixed on Li Yundong. There was a voice in her heart shouting wildly, "There is such a powerful person in this world. What level of cultivation do I have to reach for him to even look at me in the eye?" The remaining disciples of the Fox Zen school looked at Li Yundong's back and secretly took a deep breath. Chao Yi, who was ranked 6th, said to Lu Yi excitedly, "Shibua, what is his relationship with Su Chan? What is his relationship with Ao Wushuang? How can he be so powerful?" Lu Yi stared at Li Yundong. He was also so excited that his eyes were shining, as if he had forgotten his serious injuries. He said, "I don't know, but I guess they should be very close." Chao Yi pulled Lu Ye's sleeve and whispered, "Shibua, you have to find a way to keep this person." Lu Yi smiled but didn't say anything. At this time, Li Yundong cupped his hands again and said, "Who else wants to go up?" At this time, he had defeated 7 people in a row. Every match was dazzling and convincing. For a moment, the 6 major sects and the other small sects that came to take advantage of the situation were silent. Some cultivators even had the faint intention to leave. However, some cultivators who were greedy for the treasures of the Fox Zen school were unwilling to give up and said to Zhang Tianhe of the Jingyi school, "Jinren Zhang, are we going to sneak back like this? Jingyi school is the leader of the cultivation world. If you can't beat them, we will be convinced." Zhang Tianhe saw that everyone was looking at him. Although he was very afraid of Li Yundong's amazing talent in fighting and profound cultivation, when he subconsciously glanced at Zi Yuan, he suddenly found that Zi Yuan was not looking at him like everyone else. Instead, her eyes were fixed on Li Yundong in the arena. Zhang Tianhe had been very attentive to Zi Yuan before, but he had never gotten a smile from her. But at this time, she was moved by Li Yundong. Zhang Tianhe's heart suddenly burned with jealousy. He no longer hesitated. With a cold snort, he stepped forward and said loudly, "Zhang Tianhe of the Jingyi school of the Shangqing sect. Please enlighten me, /OM/4527-894-1954. Chapter 272. Go to watch net. As soon as Zhang Tianhe entered the arena, all the cultivators' hearts tightened. Go to watch net. This was because the reputation of the Jingyi school was too great. Zhang Tianhe was the youngest son of the leader of the Jingyi school and also the last disciple. Naturally, his kung fu and magic were nothing to scoff at. Is the Xianmen sect more powerful, or is this nameless kid who came out of nowhere more powerful? All the cultivators had the same thought running through their minds. Zhang Tianhe pinched his fingers and slowly stroked the blade of the 7 stars treasured sword in his hand. He quickly calculated the situation on the battlefield. Just now, he had rushed out on his own. But when he came to the field and faced Li Yundong, he suddenly calmed down. Based on the strength that Li Yundong had shown just now, it would be a lie for Zhang Tianhe to say that he was confident of winning. There were only a few aspects to a fight between cultivators. The first was their physical strength. It depended on whose cultivation was deeper, which was also to see whose internal strength was deeper. However, having a deep internal strength was not enough. One had to have Taoist magic, which was the specific way to fight. It depended on who knew more Taoist magic, who knew more Shentong magic, and who could use it more exquisitely. The physical strength that Li Yundong had shown just now was extremely shocking. Not only was his Jinqi vigorous, but it was also extremely condensed. It was obvious that he had put in a lot of hard work in his cultivation, especially when he had controlled the blue bricks on the ground to move back half a meter like dragging a carpet. This was absolutely impossible to do without an extremely powerful and condensed Jinqi. The second was their powerful magical weapon. A good magical weapon was enough to make an ordinary cultivator become a famous master in the world. Zhao Wuji, who held the 9-yin locust wood sword, was the best example. If Li Yundong hadn't coincidentally injected the ghost Yin Qi into the Fan of Seven Treasures, his Fan of Seven Treasures would have been defeated long ago. Once the magical weapon was defeated, more than half of the battle would be lost. Unless one had great shintong and great ability, there was no way to turn the tables. Although the seven-star sword in Zhang Tianhe's hand was a powerful magical weapon of the Jingyi school and one of the 5 famous swords in the world, Li Yundong's Fan of Seven Treasures was not to be trifled with. It was also a top-notch powerful magical weapon in the cultivation world. Back then, the Fox Zen school had relied on it to fight all over the world without encountering any opponents, and it had been in the limelight for a while. However, later on, the Fox Zen school did not produce any powerful male cultivators, so the reputation of the Fan of Seven Treasures gradually declined. Zhang Tianhe was very knowledgeable, so it was impossible for him not to know the power of the psychic Fan of Seven Treasures. Especially when he saw the intense and bizarre battle between the psychic Fan of Seven Treasures and the Nine-Yin Locust Tree Sword, even Zhang Tianhe, who was from the orthodox Xianmen sect, had his horizons widened. If the psychic Fan of Seven Treasures and the Seven-Star Sword were to fight, no one could say for sure who would emerge victorious. Thirdly, just looking at whose cultivation was deeper and whose magical treasures were stronger, it was not certain that they would win. In the process of a fight, it also depended on whether the two sides were agile, experienced, and strong-willed. Any one of these factors was enough to tilt the outcome of the fight to one side. However, Zhang Tianhe believed that no matter which of these 3 points he looked at, he did not have the confidence to win. Watch Net. 7 KOM. It's not a big deal if I lose, but it's a big deal if I humiliate the sect. In this battle, you can only win, not lose. Zhang Tianhe carefully looked at Li Yundong, trying to find some flaws. But when Zhang Tianhe saw Li Yundong standing in the field, his entire body seemed to be full of flaws. It was as if as long as he raised his hand, this guy would fall to the ground. But when Zhang Tianhe thought about the combat talent and amazing reaction that Li Yundong had shown during his 7 consecutive victories, he felt that it was terrifying. Zhang Tianhe slowly mobilized the Jinqi in his body. He secretly gritted his teeth and made up his mind. He had to defeat this rare and powerful enemy in front of him in the shortest time possible. Zhang Tianhe stood 5 meters in front of Li Yundong. He inserted the 7 stars sword into the scabbard on his back, took a deep breath, and crossed his arms, as if he was holding an invisible ball. He slowly raised it, and when he reached the highest point, his body shook violently. This shake was like a black bear shaking off lice. The clothes on Zhang Tianhe's body shook violently and made a crisp sound. Zi Yuan's eyes immediately revealed a strong look of admiration. She whispered, "What a good move, heaven and earth embrace." Wan Hongling's cultivation was not high enough, so she couldn't see the kung fu in Zhang Tianhe's shake. She asked in confusion, "Sister Zi Yuan, what's so great about that?" Zi Yuan said, "This Zhang Tianhe deserves to be from the Xianmen sect, and he deserves to be the last disciple of Master Zhang. His kung fu is extremely pure. Look at his shake, and his whole body is overflowing with gang qi. Look at his hug just now. It means that he is holding the spiritual qi of heaven and earth for his own use, striving to be one with heaven and man. That shake is even more amazing. It shakes the gang qi all over his body into a soft effect, and the clothes on his body can actually make the sound of tearing through the air. It's amazing, really amazing." Wan Hongling opened her mouth wide. "Is Li Yundong his opponent?" Zi Yuan's face was solemn. "I don't know. Zhang Tianhe is undoubtedly the top cultivator of the younger generation. He is a strong opponent for Li Yundong. I can't guess who will win and who will lose when the two of them fight." While the two of them were talking in private, the cultivators of the various sects were also whispering to each other, guessing who would win between Li Yundong and Zhang Tianhe. Zhang Tianhe's shake revealed the authentic Xianmen sect's internal energy, and the momentum of his body suddenly rose to a peak. He opened his eyes, which were like lightning, and said loudly, "Jinrenli, I'm sorry." After that, the seven-star sword behind him suddenly jumped out and floated in the air, staring at Li Yundong like a tiger watching its prey. It didn't take the initiative to attack, but just put on a defensive posture. Zhang Tianhe's waist suddenly twisted, and his upper body was extremely low. His body was undulating, and his arms were stretched backward like flowing clouds. Zi Yuan suddenly widened her eyes and sent a private voice transmission to Li Yundong, "This is the wind body cloud hand. Li Yundong, hit him in the middle. Don't let his luck succeed." When Li Yundong heard Zi Yuan's words, he frowned slightly. He wanted to reply, but he didn't know how to send a private voice transmission, so he just glanced at Zi Yuan. Go to C. Color * caret and text learn %super #speed. Update. Zi Yuan seemed to understand what Li Yundong was thinking and shouted anxiously, "This is the Five Thunders spell." He was summoning lightning. Be careful. As soon as Zi Yuan finished speaking, she heard a loud crack in the sky and the sound of thunder rumbled. Li Yundong was shocked. He suddenly looked up and saw dark clouds rolling in the sky above his head, and thunder and lightning were rolling in them. However, Li Yundong was a person who had gone through divine tribulation, so his fear of this level of heavenly thunder was greatly reduced. In his heart, he even vaguely felt that he didn't have to be afraid of heavenly thunder of this level. He could even control it. As soon as this thought came to his mind, he took a deep breath, and all the Jinqi in his body rushed out from the top of his head like a beacon of smoke. It was like a long, straight line, and his qi was like a bull. He also imitated Zhang Tianhe's movements and performed the wind body and cloud hands. When the cultivators of the various sects saw that Li Yundong's movements were exactly the same as Zhang Tianhe's, they suddenly burst into an uproar. The two disciples of the Zhenyi school who followed Zhang Tianhe widened their eyes and shouted, "Impossible! How can he also know the wind body and cloud hands?" Hua Tuo had created the five animals play by watching birds and beasts. Zhang Sanfeng had comprehended the Tai Chi magic by watching turtles and snakes, and Ji Ji had created Xingyi boxing by watching two chickens fighting. Since ancient times, almost all martial arts and Taoism had originated from the natural imitation of animals, and the wind body and cloud hands were the same. Thunder and lightning were the power of heaven, but where did thunder and lightning come from? There was no other reason. If there was wind, there would be clouds, and if there were clouds, there would be thunder and lightning. This move of the wind body and cloud hands was a secret of the Zhenyi school. It relied on the imitation of the wind and clouds, and then mobilized one's Jinqi to attract heavenly thunder. Zhang Tianhe's wind body and cloud hands was undoubtedly the authentic one. It used a secret posture to attract thunder and lightning. Although Li Yundong's imitation was very similar, in fact, he used his own majestic Jinqi to attract thunder and lightning. Zi Yuan naturally knew the difference between the two. Her face was suddenly full of shock. She widened her eyes and murmured, "Is he crazy?" Wan Hongling was also shocked. How can he know the wind body and cloud hands? I've never seen him practice it before. Sister Zi Yuan, did you teach him? She was in an extremely shocked mood, so she blurted out this sentence and even forgot to use the sound transmission. It immediately attracted the female disciple who had come with Zhang Tianhe, Zhou Ping, who suddenly turned her head to look at her. Her eyes flickered, and her expression was one of surprise and doubt. Zi Yuan had not come to her senses at this time. She shook her head and said, "I never taught him this. He was just imitating and confusing Zhang Tianhe." Before Zi Yuan could finish her words, Zhang Tianhe's movement of the wind body and cloud hands suddenly stopped. It was as if the stormy sea had suddenly frozen, and the stormy sky had frozen in an instant. There was a loud crack between heaven and earth, and a bolt of lightning instantly illuminated the clouds. Zhang Tianhe's hands, which were behind his back, suddenly clasped together and pinched his fingers together. He shouted, "Five thunders of the way of heaven, help me destroy evil." As he spoke, there was another loud crack in the sky. The dark clouds in the sky began to spin rapidly, turning into a vortex. In the middle of the vortex, lightning flashed, and the momentum was terrifying. The cultivators of all sects looked up at the heavenly thunder with fear on their faces. Cultivators were most afraid of thunder. When it rained on a cloudy day, those whose cultivation was lower did not dare to practice magic or use powerful magical weapons. They did not even dare to fly high. Among all kinds of cultivators, those who could practice thunder techniques were definitely the top cultivators. Zhang Tianhe's sudden use of the five thunders immediately shocked everyone present and made them feel fear. They thought that the power of the heavenly thunder was unstoppable. After Zhang Tianhe let out a loud shout, he suddenly pointed to the sky with both hands and shouted, "Thunder, come." The moment he pointed his finger up, Li Yundong's movements also stopped. The white qi above his head became thicker and thicker, penetrating straight into the rolling dark clouds. He also let out a loud shout and mobilized all the jinqi in his body to attract the heavenly thunder in the clouds. Li Yundong had once absorbed the power of heavenly thunder, so when the jinqi in his body was sent to the sky filled with thunderclouds, it immediately caused the heavenly thunder to fall. Boom! Crack! 2 consecutive thunderclaps rang out in the sky at the same time. At the same time, 2 bolts of lightning struck down and struck Li Yundong and Zhang Tianhe. At the moment when the heavenly thunder was about to strike, Li Yundong suddenly controlled his jinqi to rush toward Zhang Tianhe. At the same time, the Baihui acupoint on the top of his head immediately closed, and all the remaining jinqi in his body surged to the top of his head to resist. The fan of 7 treasures also suddenly jumped into the air to block the fierce heavenly thunder. Although Zhang Tianhe's 7 stars sword had also jumped into the air to block the heavenly thunder, he had never expected that the jinqi gushing out of Li Yundong's body would also attract the heavenly thunder, causing him to be struck. Therefore, he was not prepared to resist at all. Although the 7 stars sword had blocked most of the power of the heavenly thunder, a small part of it still hit his body. The power of the heavenly thunder was not something that a human body could withstand. Zhang Tianhe was immediately struck and spat out a mouthful of blood. He fell backward. Zhou Ping of the Zhengyi school and another short and fat disciple who had gone down the mountain with them immediately rushed forward in shock. Zhou Ping quickly pointed at the acupoints on Zhang Tianhe's body, and the other kept injecting her jinqi into Zhang Tianhe's body. Zhou Ping turned her head and looked at the scene in shock and anger. At this time, she saw that Li Yundong's hair was disheveled, and his clothes were in tatters. The shoes on his feet were also broken, and only his pants were intact. Although his figure looked extremely disheveled, Li Yundong's face was ruddy, and he was full of energy. His gaze was even sharper than before, and he was awe-inspiring, looking down on all the heroes. This shock was no small matter. Almost all the cultivators present sucked in a breath of cold air. The battle in front of them had turned into a battle of heavenly thunder between the two of them. This was too exaggerated, wasn't it? But what was even more exaggerated was that Zhang Tianhe, an inner disciple of the Zhengyi school, who was known as the authentic Xianmen sect and the #1 sect in the world, had actually been sent flying by a bolt of lightning by a nameless brat, and this brat was actually unharmed. Could it be that this guy is actually a great cultivator who has passed the thunder tribulation? A cultivator shouted in fear. Being able to pass the 8th stage of the thunder tribulation meant that this person was a well-deserved great master of cultivation. He could be on an equal footing with the strongest great master of any sect in its heyday. To pass this stage, one had to first pass the 7th stage of the Jinshan phase and cultivate the indestructible Jinshan before they could cultivate. But if Li Yundong had cultivated the indestructible Jinshan, then he could kill all the cultivators here with one hand. How could they not be afraid and in awe? Therefore, a cultivator immediately retorted, "Nonsense. If he had cultivated to the indestructible Jinshan phase, would he still need to talk nonsense with us before? He could crush us with one little finger. That's right. For thousands of years, there have been so many cultivators, but how many of them have been able to cultivate to the indestructible Jinshan phase? Those who can cultivate to the Yuanying phase are great masters. The indestructible Jinshan. Forget it, this can only be cultivated with the Dun Jin Dan. In today's cultivation world, no one has been able to cultivate to this stage. These people were talking about it, but Li Yundong cupped his hands and said in a clear voice, "I've won another game. May I ask if you can keep your promise and leave?" For a moment, everyone looked at each other. Many of them had the intention to retreat and nodded secretly. Zhang Tianhe of the Zhengyi school had been defeated, and he had been defeated in one move. What could they do? Li Yundong saw that these people had the intention to leave, and he was immediately delighted. Just as he was about to speak, he saw Zhou Ping suddenly stand up and say loudly, "No, we still have a master from a sect here who hasn't made a move yet." Li Yundong frowned and said, "Who is it? Who else hasn't made a move yet?" Zhou Ping sneered, pointed behind her, and said loudly, "Zi Yuan of the Lingdong sect of the Zhengyi school, /OM/ for 527-894-1954. Chapter 273. Go to watch net. Zhou Ping's words immediately shocked almost everyone present. The cultivators of various sects couldn't help but think, yes, isn't Zi Yuan the strongest master of the younger generation in the cultivation world? Why didn't she make a move? Wan Hongling saw that Zhou Ping had brought the flames of war to Zi Yuan, and she didn't want Li Yundong and Zi Yuan to fight, so she immediately jumped up and said angrily, "What do you mean by that?" Zhou Ping sneered. "What do I mean? I was going to ask you what you meant by that. Just now, I saw that you were quite concerned about Li Yundong, who was protecting the evildoers of the Fox Zen school. May I ask, Jinren Zi Yuan, as the eldest Shiji of the Lingdong sect of the Zhengyi school, how should you explain this?" Wan Hongling said angrily, "Does my sister Zi Yuan still need to explain to you?" Zhou Ping snorted. She cupped one hand in the other before her chest and said to the cultivators of the various sects in a low voice, "Everyone, look. The people of all the major sects have made a move, but the Lingdong sect has not. If this isn't favoritism, then what is? If you say that they didn't collude with this guy, I won't believe it." Zi Yuan usually treated any cultivator coldly, and she never smiled at male cultivators. In addition, her cultivation quotient was extremely high. Although she treated people coldly, she was polite and well-mannered, so she had a good reputation in the cultivation world. Watch net. 7 KOM. When Zhou Ping said this, the eyes of the cultivators from all sects immediately fell on Zi Yuan's face. They all looked at her doubtfully. Zi Yuan secretly frowned. She knew that she had been forced into a corner by Zhou Ping, and she had no choice but to fight. Zi Yuan stretched out her hand and stopped Wan Hongling, who was about to say something else. She said lightly, "Since the Pope's fellow disciples have said so, I won't hide it anymore." Wan Hongling opened her mouth to speak, but Zi Yuan glared at her fiercely. She immediately closed her mouth in anger and glared at Zhou Ping fiercely. She walked to the center of the field and cupped her hands to Li Yundong from 10 meters away. She said in a clear voice, "Jinren Li, it's my honor to fight with you. Please don't show any mercy." Zi Yuan's words were full of subtext. She meant to tell Li Yundong, "If you show mercy at this time, I won't be able to explain myself." But Li Yundong just understood it the other way round. He hadn't expected that Zi Yuan would actually take action in person. In Li Yundong's opinion, Zi Yuan was not only beautiful like a fairy, but also dignified and steady. She could be called a teacher and a friend to him. Zi Yuan had a very high position in Li Yundong's heart, only below Su Chan. He absolutely did not want to fight with her here. Therefore, Li Yundong interpreted Zi Yuan's words as, "Hey, we are friends. In this kind of place, we can just put on a show. You have to be merciful." Thinking of this, Li Yundong cupped one hand in the other before his chest and said, "Well, I was just about to ask Shinran Zi Yuan for advice." Zi Yuan nodded slightly, and her expression became cold in an instant. She narrowed her eyes slightly, and a sharp divine light shot out from her eyes. Like a sharp arrow, it pierced Li Yundong's eyeballs and made him feel a faint pain. Li Yundong subconsciously blinked his eyelids. Go to CNET. 7 KOM 113 Shui for net. In an instant, Zi Yuan suddenly burst into action. When Zi Yuan didn't move, she was as quiet as a virgin. She stood there gracefully, and others only felt that she was like a weak willow in the wind, as if a gust of wind could blow her up. But at this time, she suddenly moved. The people on the sidelines only felt that Zi Yuan seemed to have turned into a wave in an instant, fiercely pouncing on Li Yundong like a raging storm. When Li Yundong opened his eyes again, he saw that Zi Yuan's figure had swayed from 1 to 2, and then from 2 to 3. The flowing cloud sleeve in her hand was like a raging wave, surging toward Li Yundong. Li Yundong was stunned for a moment. Without thinking, he immediately took a step back. Zi Yuan's flowing cloud sleeve rushed in front of Li Yundong's face. This attack suddenly missed, but the shock made the muscles on Li Yundong's face flow. Li Yundong was shocked. Is this fairy sister for real? Before he could react, he saw Zi Yuan immediately rush forward and catch up with him again. The flowing cloud sleeve in her hand shook again, and the tip of the sleeve whipped toward Li Yundong like a steel whip. Li Yundong took another step back, and Zi Yuan missed again. This time, it was Zi Yuan's turn to be stunned. She had seen Li Yundong fight before, and he had never taken a step back. Why did he take 2 steps back in a row at this time? Zi Yuan was a little anxious. She gritted her teeth and let out a clear cry like a phoenix. With a shake of her wrist, a purple ribbon suddenly rushed out of her sleeve, like a spirit snake, and went straight toward Li Yundong's face. This move was fast and fierce, like a bolt of lightning. If someone was hit in the face, their brain would immediately burst and they would die. Li Yundong was shocked when he saw the ferocity of this attack. He took another big step back and retreated to the previous long line. At this time, the cultivators on the sidelines felt that something was wrong. Before, Li Yundong had defeated 8 people in a row, including Zhang Tianhe. When had he ever retreated? Although Zi Yuan's attack was fierce, it was not enough to force Li Yundong to take 3 steps back. There was clearly something wrong. Some of the cultivators, who had been skeptical, hissed, "What are they doing? Are they really fighting or not?" Zhou Ping took the opportunity to add insult to injury. She sneered and said, "You two have a good understanding of each other." Zi Yuan was suddenly ashamed and annoyed. She glared at Li Yundong fiercely and said in a private voice transmission, "Idiot, why did you give way? Do you want to kill me? Fight me for real." Only then did Li Yundong wake up as if he had just woken up from a dream. He reacted very quickly, cupped his hands, and said seriously, "Just now, Jinren Ziyuan stood up for me and said a few fair words, so I let her make 3 moves in a row. Jinren Ziyuan, pay attention." After that, he took a deep breath, opened his eyes, and glared like a fierce tiger. With a leap, he pounced in front of Zi Yuan in the blink of an eye. His fist was like a cannon, causing the air to distort. He no longer held back and attacked Zi Yuan with all his might. Go see net. 113 Shui, 4 net. Zi Yuan's spirit was lifted, and she shouted, "Come on." Her body swayed, and in an instant, she turned into an afterimage. Li Yundong shattered Zi Yuan's afterimage with a punch, and immediately felt that the afterimage quickly turned into countless purple ribbons that wrapped around his body, as if they wanted to tie his hands and feet. With a thought from Li Yundong, the fan of 7 treasures immediately jumped up. With a clang, all the leaves of the fan opened, and like a flywheel saw, it slashed toward the purple ribbons. However, the purple ribbons were the softest in the world, and the fan of 7 treasures could be said to be the hardest in the world. The fan of 7 treasures could only cut off 2 of them, and the purple ribbons that were binding Li Yundong were wrapped around itself. For a moment, the 2 magic treasures were tangled together. The fan of 7 treasures struggled desperately, and its leaves kept opening and closing like a saw chain. After a while, the purple ribbons were cut off, but the purple ribbons quickly closed and continued to tightly wrap around the fan of 7 treasures like vines wrapping around a tree. Li Yundong and Zi Yuan were fighting. He knew that Zi Yuan's magic was extremely powerful. If they fought at a distance, he would most likely be no match for her. Therefore, he rushed forward to fight hand-to-hand with Zi Yuan, forcing her to be unable to release her magic. However, to Li Yundong's surprise, Zi Yuan's kung fu was excellent, and she was proficient in the 8 trigrams palm. Her feet moved as if she was walking on mud, and her movements were as smooth as flowing clouds and flowing water. Her legs crossed like scissors, and there was a strong sense of strength in her speed. Zi Yuan's body was like a top, spinning around Li Yundong. Her movements were twisting, spinning, turning, and flipping, like a butterfly flying through flowers. Her hands pierced, stabbed, chopped, lifted, horizontally, hit, buckled, flipped, and supported, like a pair of ghostly whips. Li Yundong was surrounded by Zi Yuan in the middle, and he was attacked from all directions. However, he did not panic, nor did he play a game of circling with Zi Yuan. He just took a breath and closed his eyes. The hair all over his body was as sensitive as a radar, sensing the aura around him. As long as there was a hair that exploded, he would immediately punch in the direction of the explosion. He had to deal with all kinds of changes with constancy, and he could defeat 10 people with his strength. Every time Zi Yuan was about to hit Li Yundong, he would always be able to arrive first and attack her vital parts with a punch, forcing her to turn around to save herself. But when Zi Yuan wanted to pull away, Li Yundong could immediately sense it and took the initiative to lean on her, fighting with her. For a time, the 2 of them were fighting back and forth in the field, and the fight was wonderful. There were several times when Zi Yuan was about to hit, but Li Yundong was always able to predict the future and control the enemy from behind. In the face of Li Yundong's fierce counterattack, Zi Yuan was about to be hit in the vital parts several times, but she always turned over to avoid it with her unpredictable figure. Between the 2 of them, one was firm and fierce, and his punch was like the collapse of a mountain. However, within this firmness, he was able to produce a gentle force, which allowed him to not use too many moves. After a strike missed, he could quickly turn around to defend, and then launch another fierce attack. It was like the surging sea, wave after wave, his defense was like an abyss, and his offense was like the tide. The other was soft and continuous, like flowing water, but in this softness, there was a masculine force. Every time Zi Yuan attacked, her cloud hand was like a steel whip, and her sleeves would make a crisp sound of breaking through the air. It was clear that the soft force in her body had been cultivated to the extreme, so it was strong. When the 2 of them were fighting, Li Yundong's face was red, and a white chi rose from the top of his head. This white chi was condensed and did not dissipate. In the fight with Zi Yuan, he gradually changed from being passive at the beginning to taking the initiative to attack. Now, the 2 of them were fighting each other, attacking and defending each other. The more Zi Yuan fought, the faster her figure became. From time to time, she would take the time to cast 1 or 2 magic spells. As for Li Yundong, he became more and more excited. From time to time, he would mix in a few big handprints and slap Zi Yuan's magic spells away. At this time, everyone on the sidelines was staring at the field with their eyes wide open. No one spoke, for fear of missing any of their movements. The field was silent, and everyone was fascinated. Some people looked at Zi Yuan and couldn't help sighing. Jinren Zi Yuan is known as the strongest master of the younger generation in the cultivation world, and it's really not a coincidence. Some cultivators who had fought with Li Yundong sighed, especially Du Fei of the Chuanjin sect of Dragon Gate. He was originally a little unconvinced, but at this time, seeing such a fierce battle between Li Yundong and Zi Yuan, he was really convinced. It turns out that Zi Yuan hasn't used her full strength just now. More cultivators saw that Li Yundong had fought continuously, and at this time, he was fighting Zi Yuan. Not only did he not show any signs of weakness, but he also became braver. The more he fought, the more powerful his Jinqi seemed to be. This made all of them change their expressions. Is this guy a monster? Doesn't he know how to be tired? How strong is his Jinqi? It's so bottomless. This is really terrifying. Just as they were sighing, the winner of the battle between Li Yundong and Zi Yuan was suddenly decided for no reason. When Zi Yuan slapped at Li Yundong's waist, for some reason, Li Yundong didn't dodge. Instead, he let go of his flaw and let Zi Yuan hit him. Zi Yuan was slightly stunned. Just as she was about to hit Li Yundong's waist, her palm moved and missed the position of his kidney. She slapped the side of Li Yundong's waist. But as soon as she slapped down, she immediately felt a very powerful force rebound from Li Yundong's body. Zi Yuan was shocked. He has fought with others so many times, but he still has such a powerful Jinqi. However, Li Yundong deliberately showed a flaw. The moment Zi Yuan hit him, the Jinqi in his body, which had been cultivated by the heavenly Jindan technique, suddenly burst out to fight back. Li Yundong roared and threw a punch at her. This loud roar made everyone's heart skip a beat. Li Yundong's punch squeezed and twisted the air. Zi Yuan only had time to block it with both hands before she was blasted away by this force. The crowd suddenly burst into an uproar. They couldn't believe their eyes. Even Jinren Zi Yuan has been defeated. Wan Hongling was shocked and immediately flew to support her. She saw that after Zi Yuan landed, she staggered and a trace of blood flowed out of the corner of her mouth. Wan Hongling immediately said angrily to Li Yundong, "How could you be so ruthless?" Li Yundong was also shocked. He subconsciously wanted to go up and check on Zi Yuan's injury, but he quickly reacted and stopped his steps. He just cupped his hands and said lightly, "Thank you for letting me win." Wan Hongling raised her eyebrows. Just as she was about to curse, Zi Yuan held her down and forced herself to say, "Jinren Li is so powerful. I admit defeat." As she said this, she waved her hand and recalled her personal powerful magical weapon. Then, she turned around and flew away. Wan Hongling also flew away with her. The two of them turned into a beam of blue light and flew far away. Wan Hongling complained, "Sister Zi Yuan, you don't have to put on such a realistic act for that guy, do you? I thought you were really injured." However, Zi Yuan's face was solemn. She shook her head slightly and said, "No, that was Li Yundong's full force attack just now." With the strength of his Jinqi, he could condense it into a punch. The power was so great that I couldn't resist it. Wan Hongling was shocked. "What? You were really injured by him?" Zi Yuan nodded gently and frowned slightly. "Yes, I'm going back to meditate in seclusion to heal." Wan Hongling stomped her feet and said angrily, "Sister Zi Yuan, how could this guy be so ruthless?" "No, I'm going to make trouble for him." Zi Yuan glared at her angrily. "How can you make trouble for him? Now even I am no match for him." As she said this, she suddenly sighed, and there was a meaningful and complicated look in her eyes. From today on, he will become famous after this battle. From now on, his name will be known all over the world. /OM/4527-894-1954. Chapter 274. Go to watch net. Zi Yuan took the lead to leave, making the cultivators of the major sects unable to stand still. Zhou Ping saw that Zi Yuan was bleeding from the corner of her mouth. Li Yundong's punch just now was so powerful that no one on the field could stop it. It was obviously not a fake fight. She couldn't say anything more, just stamped her feet and snorted. You're ruthless. Our genie school will get back at you sooner or later. Li Yundong, don't get too cocky. She shouted to the short and fat disciple beside her, let's go. With that, the three of them quickly flew away. Watch net. 7 KOM. For a time, the people of the genie school and the Linggong sect of the genie school also left. 2 top masters and several experts on the field had left, and the people of the other sects also retreated one after another. Du Fei of the Chuanjin sect of Dragon Gate was the first to salute and said, Jinrenli, today you forced yourself to come forward and defeated 9 masters of our major sects in a row. Your magical power is amazing. However, I have a few words to say, but I don't know if I should say them. Li Yundong's face was solemn. He cupped his hands and said, please speak. Du Fei said loudly, today, we, the Chuanjin sect of Dragon Gate, will let bygones be bygones for the time being. But in the future, I hope that Jinrenli will advise the Fox Zen school not to do evil and not to do petty things. Otherwise, it won't be so easy to talk to next time. No matter how powerful you are, don't even think about making our sects give up. Li Yundong said in a deep voice, of course. Du Fei snorted, then turned to the Chuanjin Dragon sect and shouted, let's go. A disciple from the Chuanjin Dragon sect whispered, Senior Marshal brother, are we going to leave just like that? Du Fei glared at him. You're not convinced. Then go up and fight him. The disciple immediately retracted his head and muttered in a low voice, so many people were beaten back by him alone. If word of this spreads, what will others say about us? Du Fei was furious and scolded, what is more important than winning or losing in this world? It was a promise. A man's promise was worth its weight in gold, and he would naturally keep it. The scariest thing than losing a battle was losing credibility. If you're not leaving, then I'll leave. After that, he strode out of the Taoist temple. The disciples of the Chuanjin Dragon sect chased after him. Senior brother, wait for us. The Chuanjin Dragon sect was a big sect among the 6 great sects. As soon as they left, there was a large empty space. The cultivators of the other sects looked at each other. Watch net. At this time, the short, fat Dang Chang jumped out, cupped his hands, and said with a smile, Jinrenli, thank you for showing mercy just now. We, the Penglai sect, are convinced. Goodbye. Before he could finish his words, a cultivator mocked, you are the only one in the Penglai sect. What are you pretending for? Dang Chang acted as if he didn't hear this. He smiled and touched the scar on the top of his head, shaking his head as he walked away. As soon as he left, the Jinshan sect also took their leave. Then, the cultivators of the major sects left like a tide. Only some cultivators who were greedy for the powerful magical weapons of the Fox Zen school reluctantly looked back after every step. Zheng Yuan, the leader of the Yin Yang sect in Mount Wuhua, stared at Li Yundong with sparkling eyes. No one knew what he was thinking. At this time, Ding Nan saw that Li Yundong had single-handedly forced back so many people from the major sections. He stood alone in the field and looked down at all the heroes. He could really be considered a hero. Dugu Chobai. For a moment, her heart was in a mess, as if a bottle of flavors had been knocked over. Ding Nan whispered to Zheng Yuan, Master, are we still not leaving? Zheng Yuan narrowed his eyes and said in a low voice, you go first. I'll be there in a minute. Seeing that the cultivators had left one after another, Li Yundong turned around and walked quickly to Lu Ye's side. After his series of battles, although Lu Yi looked very encouraged and nervous, when the victory was decided, he breathed a sigh of relief and suddenly couldn't take it anymore. Li Yundong saw that Lu Yi was breathing less and more. He nervously grabbed Lu Ye's hand and wanted to transfer Jinshi to him. However, Lu Yi struggled to wave his hand and said with difficulty, You want to find Su Chan's whereabouts. I know. But I have a presumptuous request. For the sake of me, an old man who is about to die, please promise me, okay? Li Yundong vaguely guessed what Lu Yi was going to say, and a look of embarrassment appeared on his face. Seeing this, Lu Yi panted and said, Don't worry. Even if it's Su Chan, she will also want you to do this. Li Yundong said in a deep voice, Go ahead. The corner of Lu Ye's mouth twitched, and he forced a smile and said, You've seen it. Our Fox Zen school has been bullied. They want to kill us and destroy us. In the future, when I'm gone, if there's no strong leader, they will be bullied sooner or later. Let's go. As he spoke, Lu Yi suddenly spat out a mouthful of blood from the corner of his mouth. It was dark red, and it was obvious that he couldn't hold on for long. He suddenly grabbed Li Yundong's hand tightly and said, Do you want Su Chan to lose her sect in the future? If you take over the Fox Zen school and become the leader, Su Chan will be very happy. Li Yundong frowned and said, But I'm so young, and... He wanted to say, I'm not a fox spirit. But he glanced at the other disciples of the Fox Zen school around him and didn't finish his sentence. Lu Yi seemed to know what Li Yundong was thinking. He gasped and said, Extraordinary times call for extraordinary things. Right now, there is no one more suitable to be the leader of the Fox Zen school than you. If you don't take over, the danger of the Fox Zen school's destruction will come tomorrow. I won't die in peace. Chao Yi, who was standing to one side, also said with tears in her eyes, Shirbo leader, don't say any more. At worst, we can hide our identities in the future. If the Fox Zen school disappears, let it disappear. After she finished speaking, the other female disciples of the Fox Zen school also covered their mouths and sobbed. Li Yundong couldn't bear to see women cry, especially a group of beautiful women. He immediately sighed and said, Well, I'll try my best. If there is a better candidate in the future, I will pass the position of the leader to him. Seeing Li Yundong agree, Lu Yi immediately relaxed. He also loosened his old, thin hand that was holding Li Yundong tightly and slowly lowered it. He murmured softly, In the future, you have to treat them better and lead them to the right path. If there are any disobedient ones, you can deal with them no matter how you deal with them. In addition, Su Chan is in Dongwu City. The more Lu Yi spoke, the lower his voice became. Gradually, he lowered his head and finally fell silent. Li Yundong felt his pulse and found that there was no pulse at all. It was obvious that he had passed away. He suddenly became anxious. Hey, where is Dongwu City? Can you finish your sentence? F***ck, is it true that all the people who are about to die are half-hearted? At this time, the remaining disciples of the Fox Zen school burst into tears. For a moment, the Taoist field was gloomy, and the sound of crying shook the sky. Li Yundong sighed, shook his head, stood up, and remained silent. Chao Yi, the sixth disciple of the Fox Zen school, was obviously the best at making decisions among the disciples. She stood up, wiped her tears, and asked, Leader, what should we do now? 2 days ago, Li Yundong was still a college student. Now, in the blink of an eye, he had become the leader of a cultivation sect. This change in identity and role made him a little uncomfortable. Li Yundong smiled bitterly and said, Don't call me leader. Just call me Li Yundong. Chao Yi took a step back, shook her head, and said respectfully, There is a difference in seniority. Then, she said to the other disciples of the Fox Zen school, "Everyone, come and pay your respects to the leader." The disciples of the Fox Zen school stood up one after another and stood side by side with Chao Yi. They bowed to Li Yundong, causing him to hurriedly say, "You don't have to do this, you don't have to do this." However, Chao Yi insisted, "Our Fox Zen school has suffered such a disaster. Although our vitality has been greatly damaged and our sect has withered, etiquette cannot be abolished. If the leader doesn't agree, we won't get up." Li Yundong had no choice but to let them be. Seeing a group of beautiful women in Taoist robes kowtow to him, he felt very strange. After they finished bowing, Chao Yi got up and introduced the disciples of the Fox Zen school to Li Yundong one by one. These disciples were all women. There were 11 of them, including Chao Yi. All of them were so beautiful that Li Yundong was dazzled. When these fox spirits greeted Li Yundong, their eyes wandered and they boldly looked at the young and handsome new leader. When they retreated, they whispered to each other, "This is really rare. In the history of our Fox Zen school, there have only been 3 men who have been the leader, including him. Isn't that right? He's still a pure human, not a fox demon. It's the first time in the history of our Fox Zen school that a foreign being has been the leader." Li Yundong heard their whispers clearly, and he felt more and more awkward in his heart. Standing in the field, he felt like he was sitting on pins and needles. After everyone had introduced themselves, Chao Yi asked, "Leader, what are your plans now?" Li Yundong sighed and said, "I hope you don't mind me telling you the truth. I came here because I was worried about Su Chan's safety. I couldn't stand them bullying the few, so I intervened. But I didn't expect that I would become the leader of the Fox Zen school. I'm burning with anxiety now. I just want to go to Dongwu City to find Su Chan immediately. Only by finding her first can I calm down. I hope you can understand." Chao Yi glanced at Li Yundong and thought to herself, "I didn't expect this new leader to be such a romantic." She said, "Then what should we do?" Li Yundong pondered for a while and said, "I think the major sects should care about their reputation and won't come back. But if there are any thieves with ulterior motives coming, you might as well disperse first and come back after the limelight has passed. I'll wait for you here. I'll go to Dongwu City to find Su Chan and come back. What do you think?" Chao Yi opened her mouth and wanted to object, but she saw that although Li Yundong's tone was one of negotiation, his eyes were firm. It was obvious that he had made up his mind, so she changed her mind and said, "There's no need to disperse. Although the major sects are a little shameless, they still have credibility. Even if there are some thieves coming, we can deal with them. Leader, please come back quickly. Our Fox Zen school can't be without a leader." Li Yundong smiled and said, "It's a group of foxes without a leader." Chao Yi smiled slightly. Just as she was about to speak, her expression suddenly changed. She shouted at the person behind Li Yundong, "Who is it?" Li Yundong turned around abruptly, only to see a cloud of black smoke quickly passing by Yi Yu's body. Chao Yi pointed at the black smoke, and 2 amei short thorns quickly shot out of her sleeves. The thorns stabbed into the ground with a thud, but they missed. After the black smoke passed by, it let out a burst of laughter. Before Li Yundong could chase after it, it quickly left. The black smoke went all the way to the foot of the mountain before slowly condensing into a human figure. It was Zheng Yuan of the Yinyang sect. Zheng Yuan looked at the Fox Zen school on the top of the mountain and laughed. He waved to Ding Nan, who was standing not far away, and said, "Pinger, let's go." Ding Nan looked at him in confusion. "Master, where did you go just now?" Zheng Yuan proudly took out a golden hairpin from his sleeve and shook it in front of her. "Look, what is this?" Ding Nan looked at it and saw that the golden hairpin was about 5 inches long. Its tip was faintly flowing with silver-gray light, and its tail was a phoenix tail pattern with a golden tassel hanging from it. It looked exquisite. Ding Nan asked curiously, "This seems to be the powerful magical weapon that Yan Fang used to sneak attack Yi Yu?" Zheng Yuan laughed and said, "Yes, this is the threaded hairpin of soul traversing of the Fox Zen school. It's a good powerful magical weapon. How could I, Zheng Yuan, return empty-handed from this trip? Good Pinger, when we return to the mountain, I will pass this powerful magical weapon to you. Then you will know the magic of this powerful magical weapon." After that, he reached out to pull Ding Nan's wrist. When their skin touched, Zheng Yuan intentionally scratched her palm with his fingers. Ding Nan smiled slightly, as if she hadn't noticed it, but she sneered in her heart, "Old pervert, how dare you have any ideas about me? You must be tired of living. I should go find the little girl next." Chapter 275. Go to watch net. Chao Yi quickly rushed to Yi Yu's body, took a look, stamped her feet, and gritted her teeth. "I don't know which shameless person took away my Shiji's threaded hairpin of soul traversal. Humph. Luckily, I discovered it in time. Otherwise, junior sister Yi Yu's icy Vajra wheel would have been seized by him." After that, she thought of something and picked up the Vajra wheel beside Yi Yu. She held it in front of Li Yundong with both hands and said, "Leader, this is my Shimmy Yi Yu's powerful magical weapon. Please accept it. Watch net." Li Yundong frowned but didn't take it. He asked, "Why don't you keep your Shimmy's things for me?" Chao Yi said, "This powerful magical weapon was left to Shimmy Yi Yu by the former leader. Now that the former leader and Yi Yu are dead, it is naturally handed over to the current leader, that is, you, to keep. In the future, if you have your own disciple, you can pass on this magical treasure and make it flourish." After pondering for a while, Li Yundong took the Vajra wheel with both hands and felt that it was heavy. The shape of this powerful magical weapon was very much like a crescent moon when the moon was waning. One side was silver, with a beautiful flying bodhisattva painted on it, and the other side was gold, with a ferocious and brave Vajra Arhat painted on it. Li Yundong stroked the Vajra chakram with his fingers, only to feel that it was cold to the touch. Especially when his fingertips touched the blade on the outside of the Vajra chakram, he suddenly felt a threatening chill from the blade, which made his hair stand on end. "This magical weapon is really strange," Li Yundong said, pointing at the serrated blade on the inside of the Vajra chakram. "Why are its serrated teeth inside?" Chao Yi smiled slightly and said, "In fact, there are also serrations on the outside, but the serrations are so small that they are almost invisible to the naked eye. Once it rotates, this Vajra wheel can cut almost any hard object. The inner serrations are actually more used to lock the opponent's weapon in combat. Sect leader, you can experience the wondrous uses of this magical treasure in the future after you subdue it." Li Yundong nodded. He wanted to put the powerful magical weapon away, but he felt that it was inconvenient. "I run around with the fan of 7 treasures on my back all day long. It's already very annoying. I can't run around with this thing on my back, can I? If the police see this, they'll probably arrest me as a controlled object, right?" Chao Yi covered her mouth and laughed. "As the leader of a sect, are you afraid of the secular police?" Li Yundong spread his hands. "Am I supposed to hide in the mountains for the rest of my life? Entering the world to cultivate naturally has to follow the rules of the world." Chao Yi thought for a moment, took out 2 small colorful brocade pouches from her side, and said, "I have 100 treasures bag here. Although it's small, it's actually a spirit space inside, which can be used to store all kinds of things." However, it had a disadvantage. It could be stored, but it couldn't be taken out. If you want to take it, you have to destroy this 100 treasures pouch in order to take it out. Chao Yi held the bag with both hands and handed it to Li Yunyang, saying, "Leader, since it's not convenient for you, you can take this first. Colorful articles. Learn, net. Super_speed. More. New. Li Yundong shook his head and said, "This is yours. How can I use it? And if I encounter an enemy and need to use a powerful magical weapon, won't your bag be destroyed?" Chao Yi smiled and said, "Leader, you're treating me like an outsider. If it weren't for you, we would have died long ago, and all our treasures would have become someone else's. Go to see net. 7 KOM. This is also a small token of my appreciation. You saved our Fox Zen school and so many of our fellow disciples. If you don't use it, won't you disappoint us?" Li Yundong thought about it and felt that what Chao Yi had said was true. He didn't want to be pretentious, so he smiled and took it. However, as soon as he took it, he handed it back and said with some embarrassment, "I don't know how to use it." Chao Yi suddenly widened her eyes and said in disbelief, You don't know how to use it?" Li Yundong smiled and said, "I've only been cultivating for less than half a year, and I only know a little about Shintong magic, so I really don't know how to use it." Li Yundong's words made all the people of the Fox Zen school look at him. This group of fox spirits stared at Li Yundong with their eyes wide open and tongue-tied. Chao Yi even stammered, What did you say? You've only been cultivating for less than half a year. Leader, you're not joking, are you?" Li Yundong smiled and said, "I'm really not joking. I only met Su Chan a few months ago. After meeting her, I started cultivating." Chao Yi sucked in a breath of cold air and said with a face full of shock, "You can reach such a level after half a year of cultivation. Leader, you can be said to be the first person in the cultivation world in the past 5,000 years. Li Yundong laughed and said, "The first person in the history of cultivation doesn't even know how to use a bag. You can laugh at me as much as you want." When Chao Yi saw that Li Yundong's words were funny and easygoing, she couldn't help laughing and saying, as the saying goes, there are specializations in every field. We cultivators only know how to eat vegetarian food and chant sutras, so when the enemy comes to our door, not only can we not subdue the demons, but we also become a burden to the sect. As she spoke, she spread the bag in her hand on her palm and touched the mouth of the bag with her finger. Then, the bag opened by itself and emitted a dazzling 7-colored brilliance. Chao Yi said, "Leader, please put your powerful magical weapon in." Li Yunyang clicked his tongue in wonder. He put the huge and heavy fan of 7 treasures and the cold and sharp chakra chakram into it. As soon as the 2 powerful magical weapons touched the 7-colored brilliance, they immediately slid into it and disappeared. Chao Yi then gently touched the mouth of the bag again. The mouth of the bag automatically closed by itself, and the 7-colored brilliance also disappeared. Chao Yi handed an empty bag and a bag filled with magical weapons to Li Yundong and said, "When you need to use a treasure, you only need to tear this bag and the powerful magical weapon will automatically jump out. Go to the internet. 7 KOM. Li Yundong took the 2 bags, which were less than the size of a palm, and said with a smile, "These are good things. It's really inconvenient to carry the fan of 7 treasures all day long." He tied the bag with the powerful magical weapon to his waist and hid the other one close to his body. He said with a smile, "Then I'll go to Dongwu City first. Take care of yourself. I'll be back soon." Seeing that he was about to leave, Chao Yi said, "Leader, do you know where Su Chan is exactly?" Li Yundong immediately stopped and said with a wry smile, "Your former leader didn't have time to tell me before he died." Chao Yi asked, "Dongwu City is so big. Where are you going to find the leader?" Li Yundong sighed and said, "How would I know? If I can't find her, I'll just send a missing person notice." Chao Yi immediately said, "Don't do that. Even if we cultivators enter the secular world to cultivate, we can't make our names public. Otherwise, we will attract the attention of some cultivators lurking in the secular world and it is very likely to cause unnecessary trouble. Li Yundong sighed and said, then I can only look for her one by one. Chao Yi said, I know a place where Ao Wushuang used to stay in Dongwu City. I think Su Chan will be there. Li Yundong was overjoyed. Really? Where is she? Chao Yi said, Dongwu City, Shantang Chili. Li Yundong asked, Shantang Chili? Is that a place name? Chao Yi nodded and said, it's a tourist attraction in Dongwu City. It's 7 miles long, so it's called Shantang Chili. Li Yundong asked again, where is she in Shantang Chili? Chao Yi smiled and said, I don't know. Leader, you should be able to find her when you get there. It's not that big. Li Yundong nodded and didn't stay any longer. He quickly walked down the mountain and left. Chao Yi looked at his departing figure and sighed inwardly. Fortunately, our Fox Zen school is not fated to die. At such a critical moment, we have such a young and promising leader. How lucky we are. Li Yundong quickly left Mount Tianlong, stopped a car nearby, and headed for Dongwu City. After about an hour's journey, Li Yundong entered the downtown area of Dongwu City. Dongwu City was an ancient city with a history of thousands of years. Along the way, Li Yundong saw that the city was like an old city. In addition to all kinds of cars running on the street and many fashionable shops on both sides of the road, it retained the ancient cultural atmosphere of an ancient city everywhere. Even the bus station had cornices and arches, full of ancient charm. After another 20 minutes, Li Yundong followed the stone road to the busiest pedestrian square in Dongwu City. The driver put him down, pointed to the front, and said, that's where you want to go. Take a few steps. After Li Yundong paid, the driver stepped on the accelerator, and the car roared as it took a turn at the T-junction. Li Yundong was left standing alone at the intersection, looking at the stone archway across the street. The archway was painted red, and 4 golden characters were written on it in bold calligraphy, Shantang, Chili. When Li Yundong saw these words, he remembered that he was about to see Su Chan, who he had been thinking about day and night, and that he was about to see his beloved girl. For a moment, he couldn't help but get excited. His breathing was a little uneven, and his heart was beating wildly. Li Yundong took a deep breath and walked toward Shantang Chili. He crossed the asphalt road and walked onto a round arch bridge paved with stones. Li Yundong walked into Shantang Chili, a famous tourist attraction in Dongwu City. As soon as he got off the bridge, Li Yundong saw that both sides of the street were old buildings. They had white walls and black tiles, cornices and arches, and the road was paved with bluestone. The shops on the street had colorful flags with the names of the shops written on them. On both sides of the road, there were also roadside stalls selling all kinds of antique gadgets. Several young girls were greeting passing customers with red lips, white teeth, and bright eyes. When Li Yundong walked into Shantang Chili, he saw that many of the doors of the houses were still made of wood. If it weren't for the many fashionable tourists on the street, Li Yundong would have thought that he had returned to ancient times hundreds of years ago. Li Yundong walked to the door of a snack bar and saw that there were 7 or 8 square tables in the snack bar. Many customers were eating butter pancakes and noodles at the table, eating happily. Li Yundong stopped a young waitress and asked, "Excuse me, do you know Su Chan?" "Oh, she is about 1.65 meters tall, has a good figure, and is very beautiful. She looks about 16 or 17 years old." The waitress looked at Li Yundong with a plate in her hand, smiled, and said in a soft Wu accent, "Do you know her? Do you want to go somewhere else?" Li Yundong was dumbfounded when he heard this. He felt that the other party spoke very fast, as if she was speaking a foreign language, and he couldn't understand a word. He stammered, "What did you say?" The girl smiled and said in Mandarin, "Aren't you from Dongwu?" "I don't know either." You can go somewhere else and ask. Li Yundong suddenly understood and turned to leave. He walked along the bluestone road of Shantang Chili. When he passed by a pearl shop, he knocked on the door and asked loudly, "Is anyone there?" A bell-like voice immediately came from inside. "Hey, I'm coming." Li Yundong saw a slim girl running out of the shop, her black braids bouncing. The girl's face was a little hard to see in the dark and deep shop, but the outline of her figure was somewhat similar to Su Chan's. Li Yundong's heart suddenly thumped wildly. He subconsciously opened his mouth and stared at the girl with wide eyes. But when the girl got closer, Li Yundong was disappointed to find that the girl only looked like Su Chan when she was running. She didn't look like Su Chan at all. Li Yundong was disappointed, but he still politely asked about Su Chan's whereabouts. The girl was also very disappointed when she saw that Li Yundong wasn't here to buy pearls, but she saw that Li Yundong was handsome and dignified. She had a good impression of him, so she said with a smile, "I don't know the person you're talking about. You can go ahead and ask." Li Yundong nodded at her with a smile and continued walking along the street. The girl stood at the entrance of the pearl shop and raised her head to look at his back as he left. She whispered softly in Wunong's soft language, "Oh my God, she's really pretty. I wonder if she's my boyfriend's friend." Li Yundong didn't know that he was born with love and that girls liked him wherever he went. He continued walking along the street and was about to ask again when he suddenly heard a voice coming from not far away. "Hey, third Shixiang, how do you think Master will deal with this evildoer this time?" "I don't know. Maybe he will burn and purify her." "Oh, don't ask so many questions. Hurry up and eat. Master called us back from afar. He must have called us back for a ritual. I think this evildoer's cultivation is not shallow this time. Otherwise, he wouldn't have called all the Shixiang and Shimi of the temple back. Third Shixiang, I heard from Shixiang Wuhua that we will have a disaster this time." "Humph, do you believe that guy's words? A guy who is obsessed with beauty all day long, how much cultivation can he have?" As soon as Li Yundong heard these words, his hair immediately stood on end and he became highly vigilant. He thought to himself, "Could it be that my girl has been caught?" Li Yundong turned his head and saw two bald monks in brown robes eating in a nearby noodle shop. Li Yundong subconsciously wanted to rush in and ask the two monks if they had caught Su Chan, but he was also afraid of alerting the enemy, so he also pretended to enter the noodle shop to eat. He ordered a bowl of noodles, sat in a corner, and secretly stared at the two monks. The two monks were only whispering to each other, but they didn't notice that they had been stared at by Li Yundong. After eating the noodles, they paid and continued on their way. Li Yundong immediately followed them. The waiter behind him came up with the noodles and shouted, "Sir, your noodles." Li Yundong threw down a red note, not caring about the change, and immediately followed the two monks from afar. // 785462789541 Chapter 276. Go to watch net. Along the way, the two monks walked very fast. After following them for about an hour, they arrived in front of a temple. Watch net. 7 K.O.M. From afar, Li Yundong saw the two monks walk to the back door of the temple and knock on the copper ring on the wooden door. Then, with a creak, the door opened to the left and right, and a middle-aged monk walked out. When the two monks saw the middle-aged monk, they immediately put their palms together and bowed. "Martial uncle." The middle-aged monk nodded and said in a deep voice, "You're back. We've been waiting for you. Come in." After that, he made way for the two monks to enter the door. The moment he closed the door, he glanced at Li Yundong in the distance, intentionally or unintentionally. Li Yundong only felt that this glance was unusually sharp, and his heart suddenly skipped a beat. Li Yundong saw that the other party was sneaky and on guard. He was more and more certain that the other party was doing something shameful in the temple. He quickly walked to the wooden door and wanted to break in. But when Li Yundong approached, he saw a talisman on each side of the two wooden doors. The talisman was painted with golden Sanskrit and black vitriol. Li Yundong reached out to push the door open, but the golden Sanskrit on the talisman lit up by itself. At this moment, Li Yundong suddenly felt an extremely terrifying and dangerous aura rushing toward him. Li Yundong immediately withdrew his hand. As soon as he withdrew his hand, he saw that the shining golden Sanskrit slowly dimmed again. He frowned and took 2 steps back. He wanted to climb over the wall, but he suddenly found that the black tiles on the wall were also pasted with talismans, but they were pressed by the black tiles. If he didn't look carefully, he wouldn't be able to see them. There must be something wrong with this temple. Li Yundong sneered in his heart. As he thought about it, he quickly arrived at the main entrance of the temple. Shiyuan Temple was an ancient temple with a history of 800 years. It was also a famous tourist attraction in Dongwu City. There was a large parking lot at the main entrance. Several large buses were parked in the parking lot, and a steady stream of passengers got off them. The leading passenger was holding a small red flag in his hand and shouting loudly. Li Yundong was worried about Su Chan's safety. Ignoring the long line at the ticket office, he squeezed his way to the front of the line and shoved a tourist aside. "Buy me a ticket," he said anxiously, handing the money into the window. When he cut the queue, the people behind him couldn't take it anymore and shouted, "Hey, don't you know the rules? Line up and buy tickets." The one who was pushed away by Li Yundong was a young woman. She also hurriedly shouted, "What are you doing? Line up, where are your manners?" At this time, Li Yundong was so anxious that he couldn't care less about this. He turned his head and glared at these people coldly. Watch net. These tourists only felt that Li Yundong was glaring at them. His eyes were so terrifying and sharp that their hearts skipped a beat. Whatever they wanted to say was stuck in their throats, and they couldn't say it no matter how hard they tried. After Li Yundong bought the tickets, he apologized to these people and hurried into the temple. When Li Yundong had gone far away, these tourists felt the oppressive and suffocating atmosphere relax. They took a breath and began to curse again. Especially the young woman who had been pushed away by Li Yundong before. She stamped her feet and cursed. A woman next to her approached and said to her, "Lon Lon, what's wrong?" When the woman named Lon Lon saw this woman, she immediately said, "Lu Xia, you came at the right time. When I was buying a ticket just now, I met a guy who pushed me away. There are so many people waiting in line to buy tickets. They are all obeying the rules, but he doesn't. Is he in a hurry to be reincarnated?" The woman named Lu Xia was the female tour guide Li Yundong had met in Tibet before. Today, she was wearing an orange tour guide uniform and a pink round sun hat on her head. Her wavy black hair was exposed from the brim of the hat, making her look fashionable and graceful. She was holding a handheld DV camera in her hand and said with a smile, "Really? When we enter the garden, we'll take a good picture of him. When the time comes, we'll expose him and let thousands of righteous netizens denounce him." Hearing this, Lon Lon was overjoyed. She nodded vigorously and said repeatedly, "Yes, yes, yes." After buying the tickets, she distributed them to every tourist in the travel agency. Then, she and Lu Xia led the tourists into Shiyuan Temple. When they arrived at the Mahavira Hall, the tour guide Lu Xia took pictures of the scenery of the Mahavira Hall and the tourists in the garden. Lon Lon, the tour guide, loudly explained the history and customs of the Mahavira Hall to the tourists. After Lon Lon finished her explanation, she suddenly pulled Lu Xia aside and whispered, "Hey, Lu Xia, I found that guy." Lu Xia was stunned. "Which guy?" Lon Lon gnashed her teeth and said, "It's the guy who cut the queue and pushed me aside." Lu Xia couldn't help laughing. "Do you still remember this matter? I really admire you." Lon Lon said angrily, "You weren't pushed aside by him, so of course you don't remember. Hurry up and tell me, are you coming with me or not?" Lu Xia looked embarrassed. She glanced at the tourists who were visiting the Mahavira Hall and said, "We are leading a group, sister." Lon Lon giggled, turned around, and said loudly to the tourists, "Everyone is free to move around in the temple for 30 minutes. Don't wander around. Come back here in 30 minutes. The tourists responded loudly and immediately dispersed. Lon Lon turned around and said with a smile, "It's settled." Lu Xia smiled bitterly and shook her head. "You're not afraid of being complained. I really admire you." Lon Lon laughed and said, "You've already gone out to take private work. What am I afraid of? How was the trip to Tibet exciting?" For no reason, Lu Xia thought of the ghost-like man who looked like a god. She was stunned for a moment, but she quickly reacted. She shook her head and said, "Don't talk about these useless things. Where is the person you're talking about? Go take a look and come back. Go to the internet." 7 KOM. Lon Lon said angrily, "What's the use of taking a look? We have to take a picture of his ugly face and dirty crimes and then put it on the internet to expose the despicable behavior of such a shameless person." Lu Xia pressed her temples and shook her head. "I really can't offend you. It's just cutting the queue. You're making him look like a traitor." Lon Lon stomped her feet and said, "Are you going to help me or not?" Lu Xia begged for mercy. Okay, I'll help. Where is he?" Lon Lon pulled Lu Xia along the corridor and walked to a hidden wooden door. She looked around and saw that there was no one around. She pointed at the lock of the wooden door and said, "Look, the lock has been broken by him." Lu Xia looked over and saw that one of the copper locks had been pulled out of shape. She was shocked and said in a low voice, "What great strength." Lon Lon immediately pressed down on her arm and complained, "Yes, I still feel pain from the hit just now." Lu Xia rolled her eyes at her. "You bitch, he hit the other side of you." Lon Lon also rolled her eyes at her. "The wound has been transferred. Can't you do that?" As she spoke, she was about to push the door open and go in. However, Lu Xia grabbed her and pointed at the 2 lines of words on the door, "The monastery is an important place. Idlers are not allowed to enter." She said, "Look, you're not allowed to enter." Lon Lon said anxiously, "If that guy can enter, why can't we? Look, he even broke the lock. Maybe he went in to steal something. We are acting bravely for a just cause." After that, she pushed the door open and barged in. Lu Xia couldn't stop her, so she could only stomp her feet and follow in. When the 2 of them entered the door, they saw that they were in a forest. There were peach trees everywhere, and there were many talismans hanging on the peach trees. These talismans were dazzling, giving the forest a solemn and inviolable sense of majesty. At a glance, Lon Lon saw a man standing in the middle of the open space in the middle of the forest. She pointed and immediately wanted to speak loudly, but Lu Xia covered her mouth and pulled her to hide behind the forest. Lu Xia covered Lan Lan's mouth and stared at the figure with her eyes wide open. This figure was too familiar to her. Even if it turned into ashes, she would still recognize it. Isn't this the cultivator who looks like a god? Lu Xia's heart was beating wildly. She made a silent gesture to Lon Lon, then let go of her hand that was covering her mouth. She wrote on her palm and said, "Don't speak. Let's see what happens first." Lon Lon nodded and also wrote on her palm, "Shoot him and expose him." Lu Xia nodded, held her breath, and picked up the DV in her hand to shoot. Before she could turn it on, she heard a Buddhist chant. A middle-aged monk slowly walked out from the other end of the forest and said, Amitabha. Benefactor, why did you break into the temple? Li Yundong said in a deep voice, I want to ask if your temple has ever seen a girl named Su Chan. Lu Xia was hiding in the bushes, so she could only see Li Yundong's back. She couldn't see his face, so although she was 90% sure that it was him, she couldn't be sure. But at this time, as soon as Li Yundong opened his mouth, her heart shook and she concluded, it really is him. She cheered up, turned on the DV, and began to secretly shoot. There were talismans everywhere in the forest, and powerful Buddhist power was everywhere. This power covered up the aura of Lu Xia and Lan Lan. Li Yundong didn't notice that there were two women kissing him more than 10 meters away from him. The middle-aged monk's attention was also focused on Li Yundong, the uninvited guest, and he didn't notice the existence of Lu Xia and Lan Lan. He whispered the name of Buddha and said, there are countless living beings in the world. In front of Buddha, there is no distinction between men and women, let alone Su Chan and Li Chan. Li Yundong was worried about Su Chan's safety and was extremely anxious. Seeing that the other party was still talking to him calmly, he said impatiently, if you've seen her, then you've seen her. If you haven't seen her, then you haven't seen her. What are you talking about? The middle-aged monk chanted the name of Buddha again and said, Amitabha, if you've seen her, then you haven't seen her. If you haven't seen her, then you have. When Li Yundong heard this, he became angry. F***ck, I said that sex is emptiness, emptiness is sex. You're beating around the bush with me. It's obvious that you're trying to stall for time. Li Yundong sneered and said, you're beating around the bush with me. You just won't answer my question. Is there a ghost in your heart? The middle-aged monk asked, what is a ghost? What is a ghost? Li Yundong said angrily, whether there is a ghost or not, I can tell at a glance. Get out of the way. After that, he was about to rush inside. However, the middle-aged monk chanted the name of Buddha, pushed his palm, and clasped his thumb inward. A Mahamudra came out of the air and slapped toward Li Yundong. Li Yundong's Jinqi immediately flowed all over his body, and his bones crackled like beans being fried. He made a Vajra fist with both hands. The index finger of his left hand was straight, and the little finger of his right hand was wrapped around the first section of the index finger of his left hand. The tip of the index finger of his left hand was supported by the first section of the thumb of his right hand. He quickly pinched a handprint. It was the Bodhi guiding the first wisdom Mudra, the Vajra fist Mudra of the great Sun Dharma realm that could destroy all darkness. Li Yundong shouted, bang! The Vajrayana Mudra suddenly appeared. As soon as the two fists collided in the air trembled violently. The surrounding woods rustled, and the talismans on the woods kept rattling, like the sound of waves, which was terrifying. The middle-aged monk had intended to stop the enemy just now, so he had only used 30% of his strength. However, Li Yundong had intended to defeat the enemy, so he had used 80% of his strength. As soon as the two collided, the Vajrayana Mudra immediately smashed the middle-aged monk's palm print into pieces, and then it rushed toward the middle-aged monk without any momentum. The middle-aged monk was shocked. He immediately pushed his palms forward, and in the blink of an eye, a Vajra that was as tall as a person appeared in front of him. With a rumble, the Vajra dispersed the aggressive Mahavirokana palm print. The two of them were shocked by the fight and looked at each other vigilantly again. Lu Xia and Lan Lan, who had broken into the place, were already dumbfounded and staring blankly. Only the DV camera in Lu Xia's hand was working non-stop. By the way, I almost forgot to mention that last week, she was ranked 8th on the flower list. It was a pity that she didn't make it to the 7th, but the total number of flowers exceeded 10,000. She's really amazing. Not bad, not bad. This week, it's still the third watch, 246. As usual, it's the third watch tomorrow. Well, I can see the little girl then. Chapter 277. Go to watch net. The Mahavairokonavitra palm print that Li Yundong had used before was a secret of Tibetan Buddhism. When Li Yundong made this palm, his bones crackled, and his aura emitted a golden light from inside out, without a trace of evil chi. Obviously, he had obtained the true inheritance of the esoteric sect. Watch net. 7 K.O.M. The middle-aged monk was shocked. He had thought that this person was a thief from the cultivation world who wanted to take advantage of the situation. He did not expect that he was a master of the Tantric Buddhism sect. Buddhism originated in India, but it was introduced to China during the Han Dynasty. Along the way, it slowly divided into two branches. One branch took root in Tibet and formed Tibetan Buddhism, while the other branch took root in the Central Plains and formed the Central Plains Buddhism of today. Although the origins of these two kinds of Buddhism were the same, in reality, there were many differences in many aspects. On the surface, they were courteous to each other, but in the dark, they fought endlessly and guarded against each other. During the Qing dynasty, after the Tatars entered the Great Wall, they set fire to the Shaolin Temple, torturing the Central Plains Buddhism to the point that it was too horrible to look at. Moreover, the Qing dynasty emperor advocated the unification of the Manchus and Mongols, and the Mongolians believed in Tibetan Buddhism. The Manchus were influenced by them, therefore, the number of people who believed in Tibetan Buddhism was not small. In addition, Emperor Xuanzhi of the Qing dynasty surrendered to the Buddhism of the Central Plains on Mount Wutai and became a monk, which caused the royal family of the Qing dynasty to have a great resentment against the Buddhism of the Central Plains. From then on, starting from Kangxi and Yongzheng, the emperors and even the imperial palace all abandoned the Buddhism of the Central Plains and completely turned to Tibetan Buddhism. With the rise of Tibetan Buddhism, the Buddhism of the Central Plains was severely suppressed. As a result, the two sides became enemies. When the middle-aged monk saw that Li Yundong was using esoteric kung fu, he guessed in his heart, could it be that a master of the esoteric sect has come to make trouble? If it was just an ordinary cultivator, the middle-aged monk might have been able to scare him off with a few threatening words. However, if it was a master of the Tantric Buddhism sect, the middle-aged monk knew very well that this was his archenemy of hundreds of years. Something big must have happened for him to come knocking on his door. He could not underestimate it. Li Yundong saw that the middle-aged monk's palm seemed fierce, but in fact, it collapsed as soon as it touched him. Just as he was about to knock the other party down with his palm, the other party suddenly pushed out his palms and released a ferocious Vajra statue. In the blink of an eye, his Mahamudra was shattered. Li Yundong was also shocked. This middle-aged monk looks ordinary. How could he be a cultivation master? How many such experts were there in this temple? Although I am not afraid of one, if there are more, I will not be able to take it. No, I have to end this quickly. He secretly made up his mind. The middle-aged monk knew that the temple was currently open to the public. If the commotion here was too big, it would attract unnecessary trouble. He also decided to end the battle quickly. Watch net. The middle-aged monk put his palms together and held a string of prayer beads between his thumb and index finger. He lowered his head and quickly chanted an incantation. As he chanted the incantation, the trees in the forest suddenly swayed, and the leaves rustled, undulating like waves. The talismans hanging on the branches strangely stood up one by one, and the golden characters on them glowed brightly. The countless runes in the forest emitted a dense light, and then these lights quickly turned into gossamer threads that converged on the stage. In the blink of an eye, they turned into a mighty arhat that was as tall as two people. This arhat was wearing a golden kasaya and had one arm bare. He held a Vajra scepter with both hands and glared angrily, looking awe-inspiring. The arhat shouted loudly, and the Vajra scepter in his hand rushed straight toward Li Yundong's chest. Then, in the sky above the Arhat, a light statue of a Buddha sitting on a lotus was quickly formed and smashed toward Li Yunyang. Before Li Yundong was hit, he felt as if a mountain had fallen on his head. It was so dark that it made it hard for him to breathe. He believed that when it hit him, he would be instantly turned into powder. Without thinking, Li Yundong immediately crushed the 100 treasures bag at his waist. In an instant, the fan of 7 treasures jumped out, and the chainsaw Vajra wheel fell to the ground with a clang, motionless. The treasured fan was psychic. Sensing that its master was in danger, it immediately jumped into the air. With a swoosh, the iron fan opened, and all the fan leaves jumped out, forming a fast-spinning tray in mid-air, forcibly blocking the Lotus Buddha's downward pressure. Meanwhile, the 2 ribs of the treasured fan fiercely smashed towards the lotus seat of the Buddha like iron rods. After a few smashes, golden light shot out in all directions. The lotus leaves of the lotus seat scattered in all directions, turning into specks of golden light that fell like stars. When Li Yunyang saw that the fan of 7 treasures had jumped out to protect its master, he no longer cared about the Buddha falling over his head. Instead, he quickly made 3 handprints in a row. They were the Vajra Samaya Mahamudra, the light-gathering Buddha Mahamudra, and the superior Buddha Mahamudra. Li Yunyang shouted 3 times in a row and blasted out 3 Mahamudra in a row. The first Mahamudra hit the tip of the Luohan Vajra solidly. It was like 2 high-speed trains had suddenly collided, causing the surrounding air to buzz and tremble. The ground paved with green bricks also made a muffled thud, as if an invisible giant had stomped on the ground. Watch net. 7 K.O.M. This time, the Luohan Vajra's momentum suddenly stopped, and its speed and strength slowed down a lot. Then, Li Yunyang slapped out another Mahamudra, slapping the Vajra and sending it flying back. The transformed Luohan caught the Vajra that had flown back. Just as it was about to fight back, it saw Li Yunyang's 3rd Mahamudra follow like a shadow and hit it like a storm. This 3rd Mahamudra was extremely fierce, and it smashed the Luohan into pieces. However, after the Luohan turned into countless golden fragments, it slowly transformed into an Luohan in mid-air, turning into a Vajra holding a copper bell. The middle-aged monk snorted and said, "Our temple has a history of nearly 800 years since it was built in the Yuan dynasty. In the past 800 years, countless monks in our temple have been chanting scriptures day and night, and countless tourists have worshipped us. The Buddhist faith is as vast as the abyss and the sea, and the Buddhist power is inexhaustible. No matter how powerful you are, you can't defeat the Vajra Buddha transformed by the Buddhist faith of our temple." After that, his fingers flew and he quickly pinched a few fingers. Many golden rays of light flew out of the peach tree, which was full of runes, and 3 Vajra Arhats appeared. They joined forces with the Vajra Arhats to attack Li Yunyang. When Li Yunyang saw this, he immediately took a deep breath. His 5 fingers were so fast that they were like afterimages. The Jinqi in his body suddenly erupted, and in the blink of an eye, he madly made 12 Mahamudra, smashing the 4 Vajra Arhats. But as soon as he smashed them, he saw that the Vajra Arhats slowly gathered together again. Li Yunyang was shocked and took a deep breath. He thought to himself, "What should I do? Wouldn't this be endless and never-ending?" He thought quickly in his heart, but his eyes fell on the middle-aged monk who was constantly chanting scriptures. His heart skipped a beat. Capture the leader first. As soon as this thought flashed through his mind, Li Yundong stomped hard on the ground, causing the Vajra wheel, which had been motionless on the ground, to fly up. Without looking at it, he accurately grabbed the body of the Vajra wheel with his 5 fingers, and then threw it at the middle-aged monk. Although the Vajra wheel had not been turned into Li Yundong's own and could not be used as a magical item, it was still an extremely fierce weapon. The middle-aged monk wanted to reach out to catch Li Yundong's throw, but when he took a closer look, he saw that both sides of the Vajra wheel were sharp blades, and Li Yundong was pouncing on him like a shadow. Even if he could catch the Vajra wheel, he wouldn't be able to take Li Yundong's subsequent thunderous attack. He could only withdraw his hand and step aside helplessly. Li Yundong had wanted to take down the monk with a series of thunderous attacks, but when he saw that the monk had dodged, he had an idea. He took the Vajra wheel that was nailed to the wooden door, swept past him, and quickly entered the back hall of the temple. As soon as Li Yundong entered the back hall, he heard a buzzing sound of chanting Buddhist scriptures. He didn't stop and quickly ran in the direction of the sound. His heart was as anxious as frying oil. He was afraid that if he was a second late, Su Chan would be killed. But not long after he entered the back hall, he saw countless golden lights chasing him along the way. They transformed into Vajra arhats and attacked Li Yundong from all directions. Li Yundong didn't fight with them. If he could dodge, he would. If he couldn't dodge, he would smash them with a Mahamudra. Along the way, Li Yundong was like a fierce dragon crossing the river, causing the backyard of Shiyuan Temple to be in a foul atmosphere. Fortunately, the backyard was not open to tourists. Otherwise, it would have been a mess. Li Yundong ran for 50 meters like this and finally arrived in front of a hall. He looked up and saw that the hall had 6 floors. The highest floor was constantly smoking, and it was obvious that something was being burned. Among the chanting of many Buddhist disciples, there was a faint scream. Li Yundong's heart trembled. He immediately stamped his feet and rushed to the top of the hall from the eaves like a cannonball. However, there were statues of Vajra Bodhisattvas and flying arhats everywhere in the hall. As Li Yundong rushed, these Vajra Bodhisattvas and flying arhats sensed that someone was invading the holy land of Buddhism. They immediately transformed into golden bodies and rushed toward Li Yundong like a tide. Li Yundong roared, and the Jindan's chi in his body suddenly burst out, forcing the countless golden statues back a meter, and then he quickly rushed up. These golden statues only retreated a little, and then immediately chased after Li Yundong like maggots attached to bones. Looking from afar, in the golden light, Li Yundong's figure jumped up and down like a monkey when he forced the golden light back. Sometimes, he was entangled by the golden light, like a giant with feet of mud. He roared again and again, and the two of them were entangled. Li Yundong saw that there were more and more golden statues around him, and they were about to drown him like a monstrous wave. He knew that this was a moment of life and death. He immediately roared, and the heavenly Jindan technique in his body suddenly ran. All the bones in his body crackled, and his body swelled in an instant. In the blink of an eye, his arms became as thick as a thigh, and he grew to more than 2 meters tall, turning into a shining golden warrior. As soon as Li Yundong's body became strong, he immediately stepped on the black tiles of the tower and made a cracking sound. These Vajra Bodhisattvas and arhats were shocked by the power emanating from Li Yundong's body, and they didn't dare to come forward for a moment. Li Yundong took this opportunity to suddenly jump up a bit and jump to the 6-story tower. With a loud shout, he smashed a wooden window with his fists and broke into the tower. He saw that the tower was full of monks. The outermost monks were wearing grey robes, and there were about 100 of them. The middle monks were wearing brown robes, and there were about 20 of them. In the innermost area, there was an old monk wearing a yellow robe and a gold-threaded red cassock sitting cross-legged. He was holding Buddhist beads in one hand and knocking on a wooden fish with the other. Among these monks, there was a huge wooden pillar, which was full of shining scriptures. A woman with long black hair was tied behind the pillar with her back to Li Yundong, struggling and screaming desperately. Li Yundong had been fighting all the way here, worried about Su Chan, and had long been flustered. He roared, made a Mahamudra in his hand, and slapped the pillar in the air. With a rumble, the pillar was immediately smashed into pieces. The shining scriptures on it also lost their light. Suddenly, the people who were tied to the pillar quickly disappeared, turning into two extremely thick golden snakes. One on the left and one on the right, they ferociously slammed into the sides of the main hall, creating two holes in the main hall. Then, they fled toward the outside of the temple. Seeing this scene, Li Yundong was stunned, and there was a buzzing sound in his head. Oh no, I made a mistake. This is not Su Chan. Chapter 278. Go to watch net. At a glance, Li Yundong saw two big golden snakes, which were as thick as buckets and more than 10 meters long, scurrying away. He immediately realized that he had made the wrong target in his haste and mistaken Feng Jing for Ma Liang. Go to watch net. After the two big golden snakes fled, the pagoda became extremely quiet for a moment. All the monks looked at Li Yundong in shock. Vajra Bodhisattva and Arhat Phaetian, who had been chasing Li Yundong before, surrounded the 6th floor of the pagoda and glared at Li Yundong. Li Yundong couldn't help but smile bitterly and sigh. He opened his mouth to defend himself, but he felt that there was no way to defend himself. He could only admit his mistake, put his palms together and said, I was reckless and trespassed here. Please punish me, master. The old monk surrounded by the monks turned around. Li Yundong saw that the old monk had deep wrinkles on his face, and his eyebrows were white and long. Not only was there no anger on his face, but his face was full of smiles. He said to the monks with a smile, my disciple Wuhua said that our Shiyuan temple should have a calamity today, but I didn't believe it at the time. You guys should know that my disciple is a womanizer all day long. He's a flirtatious monk. He's probably been right a few times, but I didn't expect him to be right for once today. Heh, this crow's beak. Good things don't hit the mark, but bad things hit the mark. Amitba, it's a sin. After he finished speaking, he burst into laughter, and the surrounding monks also followed suit. With this laugh, the tense atmosphere in the Buddha hall dissipated a lot, and Li Yundong also relaxed a lot, as if he had just kicked over an incense burner and made a small mistake, rather than letting two snake demons escape. Li Yundong saw that he had rudely broken into the important place of Shiyuan temple and fought along the way, almost tearing down the main hall of the pagoda. However, the other party was not angry. Instead, he laughed and laughed at himself. The magnanimity and broad-mindedness in his words immediately made Li Yundong admire him and admire him wholeheartedly. Li Yundong bowed respectfully, put his palms together, and said, Master, I offended your temple today. If you want to punish me, I will accept it one by one. I will never resist, and I will never complain. As Li Yundong was speaking, the middle-aged monk also caught up with him. He shouted and was about to attack, but the old monk whispered to him, step back. The middle-aged monk immediately lowered his head and respectfully retreated, not looking at Li Yundong again. The old monk knocked on the wooden fish with his hand and chanted a few Buddhist names. All kinds of arhats, bodhisattvas, and vajras that had surrounded the 6th floor of the pagoda dispersed one after another. At this time, the old monk stood up and looked at Li Yundong carefully. He smiled, waved to Li Yundong, and said, Benefactor, come with me. Li Yundong saw him turn around and walk down the stairs, so he put away the fan of 7 treasures and the vajra wheel and braced himself to follow him down the stairs. Then he went. 7 K.O.M. The two of them went downstairs. The old monk turned a corner and walked into the meditation room in the backyard of the temple. He lit a stick of incense and sat down on the futon. He pointed to another futon and said, Young hero, please sit. Li Yundong sat down cross-legged on the futon and said sincerely, I don't deserve that. Master, you're making fun of me by saying that. I'm young and impetuous. I barged my way in and caused a lot of trouble for your temple. How can I be called a hero? The old monk chuckled. Oh. That day, you sacrificed yourself to eliminate evil and drew lightning to strike young Master He to death. Isn't that chivalrous and righteous? Li Yundong shuddered. His eyes widened as he stared at the old monk warily. How did you know about this? The old monk raised his head and laughed out loud. His voice shook the hard and sturdy bluestone ground. If you don't want people to know, don't do it. You've caused such a big mess, and you think no one in the world knows about it? You're looking down on us. I don't dare to say for others, but the leaders of several big sects in the world definitely know about it. Li Yundong asked in confusion, then why don't you tell on me and arrest me? The old monk shook his head and said with a smile, why should we arrest you? Do we have to arrest you because you sacrificed yourself to eliminate evil and righteous? Then what will we become? Won't we become old and dim-sighted devils? Hey, let's not talk about anything else. Just what you've done is enough to make all the cultivators in the world look at you in a different light. As the old monk spoke, he raised his head and said leisurely, there are so many cultivators in the world. Who can be like you, who would rather suffer from lightning and enforce justice on behalf of heaven? Speaking of which, compared with you, we, the senior cultivators, are so ashamed that we can't show our faces. Li Yundong's face was full of shame. Master, you flatter me too much. I believe that any good man who is brave, responsible, and bold will do what I did. The old monk laughed and said, you're praising yourself in a roundabout way. Are you saying that you're brave, responsible, and bold? Li Yundong couldn't help but chuckle. That's not what I meant. The old monk said with a smile, you deserve such a compliment. Alas, the more we cultivators cultivate, the more timid we become. The more we cultivate, the more we fear heavenly tribulation. We really need a young, promising, and chivalrous cultivator like you to come out and cheer up this gloomy cultivation world. As he spoke, he waved his hand at a mahogany square table not far away and took a teapot and 2 teacups. He poured a cup for Li Yundong and himself and said, I heard that not only have you passed the heavenly tribulation, but you have also become the leader of the Fox Zen school. Li Yundong took a sip of tea and was stunned. No way, this news spread so fast. Wasn't that just a few hours ago? How could it have spread so fast? The old monk chuckled and reached into the wide sleeve of his robe. He took out a mobile phone, pressed it a few times, and then handed it to Li Yundong. Go to CNET. 7 KOM. Li Yundong took a closer look and saw that there was a text message on the screen of the mobile phone. The content of the text message was, the 6 major sects besieged the Fox Zen school, but Li Yundong appeared halfway and defeated the attacks of the major sections. Later, Li Yundong succeeded as the leader of the Fox Zen school. I hope that the major sects who know Li Yundong's whereabouts will share the information as soon as possible. After reading it, Li Yundong looked at the title of the text message and was surprised to find that it was actually a group text message. Li Yundong felt strange and didn't know what to feel. These cultivators are really F***king fashionable. They even know how to use mobile phones to send group text messages. However, how did they know that I would succeed as the leader of the Fox Zen school? This matter was only decided after the major sects left. Could it be that there is a traitor in the Fox Zen school? The old monk looked at the change in Li Yundong's expression and seemed to know what he was thinking. He said with a smile, don't think too much. After you left, the Fox Zen school publicized the news of you succeeding as the leader with great fanfare. In this era, once something happens, it will spread all over the world in less than 5 minutes. Therefore, the cultivators of all the major sects in the world are very curious about you. They want to know who the great master who defeated all the major sects by himself is. Li Yundong said with a face full of shame, I'm ashamed. It was just a fluke. Moreover, I have just taken over as the leader of the Fox Zen school, and I have caused such a disaster. I really have no face to see anyone. The old monk laughed and said, "It doesn't matter. Which young man isn't young and impetuous? What's more, Jinren Li's cultivation time is still short, and he still lacks some tempering. I think that in the future, with his cultivation and character, he will definitely become one of the few great masters in the world. This is a blessing for our cultivation world, a blessing." Hearing this, Li Yundong felt a little better, but he still said with a ashamed expression, "Master, I'm really ashamed. I have caused a lot of losses to your temple today. I will definitely compensate you double." The old monk put his palms together and said with a smile, "There's no need for compensation, but if you are willing to donate some incense money, I will be happy to see it happen." Li Yundong laughed and said, "Well said, well said." He thought that since he had taken over the Fox Zen school, he should be able to withdraw some money from the Fox Zen school first to pay for the repair of Shiyuan Temple. In the future, he would slowly make up for it. After the old monk recited a Buddhist scripture, he changed the topic and said, "Jinrenli, do you know why I didn't care about you breaking into our temple today and destroying our cultural relics?" Li Yundong put his palms together and returned the greeting. "I think it must be because you are broad-minded and benevolent. You won't care about a rash kid like me." The old monk smiled and shook his head. "No, it's because I know that you have never done evil. On the contrary, you have made a name for yourself in the cultivation world by enforcing justice on behalf of heaven. I admire you very much, so I didn't speak ill of you. You have to know that although our Shiyuan Temple is not as long and powerful as the Shaolin Temple, it is also an ancient temple with a history of 800 years. It has a deep foundation and the majesty of Buddhism. Just now, when you broke into our 6-story pagoda, if I wanted to attack you, with the power of the Dharma of our temple, even if Celestial Master Zhang of the Jingyi school came, he would have to flee in embarrassment." Li Yundong remembered that when he had broken into the temple, he had encountered the Buddha power Vajra along the way. He couldn't help but nod in agreement and say, "Indeed, the Buddha power of your temple is powerful and majestic. It's really amazing." The old monk smiled and said, "If it were anyone else who trespassed into our temple like this, they might have been turned into millions of pieces of mustard and couldn't go back. Otherwise, if our Buddhist temple is like a vegetable garden where people can come and go as they please, where will our dignity and face be if it gets out?" When Li Yundong heard this, he stood up, bowed respectfully, and said, "Thank you for your magnanimity, Master, for not arguing with me." Speaking of this, the old monk stood up and returned the salute. We Buddhists talk about karma and retribution. As the saying goes, good will be rewarded with good, and evil will be punished with evil. It's not that there is no retribution, but that the time has not yet come. Whether it's evil or good, there will be rewards in the end. Jinrenli, if you hadn't done a great deed of kindness, I wouldn't have said these words to you. This is the so-called karma and retribution." Hearing this, Li Yundong felt a myriad of emotions in his heart. He raised his head and sighed. "I thought that it was unacceptable to the cultivation world and the world for me to be struck by lightning. I didn't expect to hear such words today. It really dispels the block in my heart. Thank you for enlightening me, Master." The old monk smiled and said, "Not at all. Justice exists in people's hearts, and good and evil exist in heaven and earth. It's our duty to punish evil and promote good. Why do you have to be so polite? By the way, I see that you are anxiously looking for Su Chan. I think I can do you a favor." Li Yundong was overjoyed. "Really? Thank you, Master." The old monk put his palms together and said, "I only hope that after Jinrenli takes over the Fox Zen school, you will restrain your disciples and not let them do evil." Li Yundong returned the salute solemnly and said, "Of course." The old monk nodded with a smile and said, "My disciples said that there will be a calamity in Shiyuan Temple today. He also said that if someone asks about the whereabouts of the target, I will tell you where you come from and where you go back. Then you will be able to find her. Hearing this, Li Yundong asked in confusion, do you want me to go back to Dongwu City, Fox Zen School, or Tiannan City? The old monk smiled and said, Amitba, I don't know. Junrenli, please help yourself. Li Yundong saw that he had closed his eyes, as if he was seeing him off. He stood up, bowed respectfully, and left the meditation room. Li Yundong walked out of the temple thinking about the 2 golden snakes he had let go of, but he didn't see the old monk of Shiyuan temple blame him at all, nor did he want him to be responsible for catching the 2 golden snakes. Li Yundong couldn't help but feel guilty and thought to himself, in the future, I must catch these 2 snake demons with my own hands. Otherwise, if they do evil in the mortal world, this sin will be on my head. Li Yundong was thinking about it. When he turned a corner in the middle of the road, he suddenly saw 2 figures running into him. At this time, he was full of thoughts and didn't pay attention. He bumped into them and heard a cry, and the 2 figures fell back. Li Yundong was quick to react. He immediately grabbed one person on each side and supported them. He took a closer look and saw that it was Lu Xia, whom he had met in Tibet before, and a woman with a good appearance next to her. It was Lon Lon. As soon as Lu Xia and Lon Lon saw Li Yundong, their eyes widened. They were so guilty that they turned around and wanted to escape, especially Lon Lon. She had been clamoring to teach Li Yundong a lesson, but at this time, when she saw this ghost-like man in front of her, she immediately pulled Lu Xia and ran away with her heart beating like a drum. Li Yundong saw the 2 women run away as if they had seen a ghost. He didn't even have time to say sorry. He sighed and saw that the other party had disappeared around the corner. He shook his head and muttered, this world is really small. Li Yundong went all the way out of Shiyuan temple and was in a daze at the gate of the temple. After thinking for a while, he decided to start searching from a nearby place, so he returned to Shantang and kept searching back and forth. After searching like this for a few hours, Li Yundong, who had lost all hope, was about to leave. Only then did he find a very familiar figure flashing in the corner of the street not far away. The girl was about 1.65 meters tall and had a slim figure. Her black hair almost fell to her waist, and her slender waist could be held in one hand. Every time she took a step, her playful black hair would jump like an elf. As soon as Li Yundong saw this figure, his heart shook and he quickly followed her. But after the big mistake in Shiyuan temple, he didn't dare to do it again. He just followed behind the girl for a few hundred meters until the girl stood in front of a sesame seed cake stall. She turned around and revealed a charming and beautiful face. Li Yundong's mind buzzed, and his chest felt like it was about to explode with joy. He saw that the girl was looking at the sesame seed cake stall eagerly. She wanted to eat it, but she seemed to have no money to buy it. She was drooling, and her expression was lovable. Who else could it be but Su Chan? Chapter 279. Go to watch net. Li Yundong suddenly saw Su Chan not far away from him. He was so happy that he couldn't control himself. There seemed to be a crazy voice shouting in his mind, "Little girl, this is my little girl. I will never let her leave my side again." Li Yundong only felt that he was quietly watching Su Chan from the side, and all the pores on his body were cheering and singing loudly. His whole body was filled with an indescribable joy and happiness. Watch net. 7 KOM. We haven't seen each other for so long. Should I go up and give her a warm hug? Or should he give her a passionate kiss? Or is it just a peaceful greeting? Li Yundong's mind was in turmoil. While he was hesitating, he saw the owner of the sesame seed cake stall speak to Su Chan, one by one, I'll cut off the fake sesame seed cake one by one. It's crispy and crispy. Ah, do you want to try it? In the face of the owner's enthusiastic greeting in Wunong's soft language, Su Chan rubbed her toes against the ground, but her eyes were fixed on the steaming sesame seed cake. She also said in Wunong's soft language, a bundle of season coins. The boss said with a smile, a cold one. She stood in front of the sesame seed cake stall, her eyes fixed on the sesame seed cake. She put her hand into her pocket but didn't take it out. She must be shy. Li Yundong, who was not far away, saw that Su Chan could also speak Wunong's soft language and couldn't afford to pay, so he immediately laughed. Just as he was about to step forward, he suddenly saw a young boy suddenly appear beside her and say loudly, "How many sesame seed cakes does this beauty want to buy? How much? I paid for her." Su Chan turned her head in surprise and saw a handsome boy smiling at her. Su Chan frowned and snorted coldly. "Can't I afford it?" she said in a loud voice. "You think I can't afford it? Do I need your treat?" After that, she took out 2 coins from her pocket and slapped them on the sesame seed cake stall. She took a sesame seed cake for herself and continued to walk forward. Seeing that Su Chan didn't appreciate his gesture, the boy immediately chased after her again. He smiled apologetically and said, "Hey, pretty girl, let's be friends. At least give me your contact information. Cell phone number, QQ number, if that doesn't work, MSN is fine too. Why don't you just tell me your name instead of telling me all of this?" Su Chan stopped in her tracks and yelled at him impatiently, "Aren't you annoying? You've been harassing me for a few days. I've already told you that I have a boyfriend. Stop bothering me." The boy was obviously a veteran in the field of flowers. He shamelessly smiled and said, "I've been paying attention to you for a few days, but I've never seen your boyfriend appear. Beauty, don't try to fool me with this. Look, I've even stopped my travel schedule for the past few days because of you. Isn't that very sincere? At least tell me your name." It's always good to have a few friends in this world. Su Chan covered her ears as she walked faster and faster. "You're so annoying. Go away. Go away." Then, she ran towards a small alley in Shantang Town. Shantang Town. Shantang Town. Watch net. The boy chased after her relentlessly. He chased her into an alley, turned a corner, and suddenly found that Su Chan had disappeared. The boy was shocked. He opened his eyes wide and looked around. All he saw were antique brick houses on both sides of the alley. There were no doors, and the alley was very shallow. You could see the end of it at a glance. So there was only a wall, and it was a dead end. He had no idea where Su Chan had gone. Could it be that she's actually a demon? Can she disappear into thin air? The boy scratched his head in a daze, then walked out in a daze. As soon as he walked out, he bumped into someone head-on. The boy felt as if he had hit a wall. The impact almost made him suffocate. He let out a cry and fell backward. It was Li Yundong. Li Yundong wanted to teach the guy who had harassed Su Chan a lesson, so he deliberately pretended not to notice and bumped into him. He pretended to be surprised and stared at the boy sitting on the ground. He widened his eyes but said nothing. The boy sat on the ground and glared at Li Yundong. "Are you blind?" he yelled. "Can't you see where you're going?" Li Yundong didn't know if Su Chan was nearby, but he wanted to give her a surprise. He was afraid that he would startle her if he opened his mouth, so he deliberately blinked and pretended not to hear. He pointed at his ear, then at his mouth, then at his mouth, and then at his hand. The boy crawled to his feet and cursed, "Damn it. I can't believe I ran into a mute. Hey, watch where you're going next time." Li Yundong didn't get angry. Instead, he looked at the boy with a smile. As the saying goes, don't hit a smiling face. Seeing that Li Yundong was smiling warmly, the boy didn't say anything more. He walked away, muttering to himself. But every 3 steps he took, he would look back, as if he couldn't understand why Su Chan had disappeared into thin air. Li Yundong waited until the boy's silhouette disappeared out of sight. He looked left and right. Seeing that there was no one around, he jumped up to the roof and started searching for Su Chan. It didn't take long before he found the figure of the little girl walking along the small stone bridge of Shantang's 7 miles, eating the sesame seed cake in her hand as she walked. Li Yundong's cultivation could be said to have reached the great success realm, far higher than Su Chan's. He was hanging behind Su Chan, so she didn't notice him at all. She just wandered around Shantang's 7 miles to kill time. Go to the internet. 7 km. As she walked, she nibbled at the sesame seed cake in her hand. She seemed to be very careful with every bite. She chewed it in her mouth for a long time before swallowing, cherishing it very much. After the little girl finished eating half of the sesame seed cake, she carefully hid the other half of the sesame seed cake in her hand. Then, she sat down on the side of the small bridge, took off her shoes, rolled up her trousers, and put her snow-white feet into the dark green river. As her feet splashed the water, her nose softly hummed an unknown tune. Li Yundong looked behind her and saw that the little girl was in this antique scenery. There was a small bridge beside her, a weak willow hanging over the river, and behind her were white walls and black tiles, flying eaves and arches. She looked like she was in a painting, and the finishing touch made the ancient scenery in front of her vivid and lively. Li Yundong looked at the little girl from a distance, and the corners of his mouth couldn't help showing a smile, which was as soft as the water grass in the river. The little girl played with the water for a while, then she bent down and picked up some water. She didn't think it was dirty. She dug some mud beside the willow tree and made a clay figurine. She was clever and dexterous. After a while, she made 2 clay figurines, one big and one small. As she played, she pointed at the small clay figurine and said to herself, "Little girl, you have to be obedient. If you don't, I won't want you." As she said this, she fiddled with the bigger clay figurine and said in a rough voice, "My little girl is the most obedient. Come on, have a bite. I'll make something delicious for you." Su Chan pouted and kissed the back of her hand. Then, she fiddled with the little clay figurine and said pitifully, "Sir, I don't have any money to spend. If you don't make something delicious for her, she will starve to death." Li Yundong's heart was filled with tenderness when he heard this. He couldn't help it anymore. He quietly walked behind the little girl and said softly, "Little girl, what do you want to eat?" Su Chan didn't react for a moment. She tilted her head and thought for a while, then said crisply, "I want to eat beer duck. The beer duck you make is the best. Well, I also want to eat cabbage and crucian carp soup. Well, I also want to eat." As she spoke, her body suddenly shook. She turned her head hard and widened her eyes. Su Chan saw an imposing, handsome boy standing behind her. He was looking at her with a smile. Who else could it be but Li Yundong? Su Chan's mouth was wide open, as if she couldn't believe her eyes. The expression on her face changed from shock to ecstasy, from ecstasy to grievance, from grievance to sadness, and finally, from sadness to surprise and worry. She was worried that what she was seeing was fake. She couldn't believe that the Li Yundong standing in front of her was real. She was afraid that this was all an illusion. Su Chan's big eyes were filled with tears. More and more tears flowed down her cheeks. After a while, like a broken string of pearls, the tears rolled down her cheeks and dripped onto the clay figurine in her hands. "Sir." Su Chan called out tentatively. Her frightened and surprised look made it seem as if she was afraid that the Li Yundong in front of her would shatter and disappear if she spoke a little louder. Li Yundong suppressed the rolling excitement in his chest. He smiled slightly, opened his arms to the girl. "It's me, girl. Don't you recognize me?" Su Chan listened to the familiar voice that had haunted her dreams. She no longer had any doubts. She burst into tears and threw herself into Li Yundong's arms. She didn't care that her hands were dirty. She clutched Li Yundong's clothes tightly, as if she was afraid that he would run away and disappear. Su Chan cried her heart out. The lovesickness, grievance, and fear of the past all disappeared at this moment. She hugged Li Yundong tightly, as if she had someone to rely on and someone who cared about her from now on. Li Yundong lovingly stroked the girl's soft long black hair. He said softly, "Well, I'm back. I won't starve to death." Su Chan was crying loudly in Li Yundong's arms. When she heard this, she burst out laughing. She raised her head, her cheeks full of tears, but the corners of her eyes curved into crescent moons. "You're so annoying," she said. "You're the one who will starve to death." Li Yundong smiled and tapped the girl's nose. "Don't quibble. I heard it all just now. How come the little girl has no money to spend?" Su Chan blushed and said unwillingly, "You heard it all. You're so annoying. You followed me secretly and didn't tell me." Li Yundong laughed and said, "Didn't I want to give you a surprise? Girl, how can you not have money?" Thinking of this, Su Chan felt sad again, and her tears fell again. Li Yundong quickly wiped away her tears, held her face, and kissed her. He pretended to be angry and said, "If you cry again, I don't want you anymore." Su Chan quickly wiped away her tears and raised her head, as if she was trying hard to pour the tears back into her eyes. She blinked a few times and felt that she didn't want to cry anymore. Then she lowered her head and said, "My master was taken away, and I didn't dare to go to you for fear that I would affect your divine tribulation. So I had to go back to the place where my master used to live. But I don't have much money with me, so I've been hungry these days." Li Yundong was so distressed that he said, "Let's go back first. I'll make you delicious food. Where do you live?" When Su Chan heard that Li Yundong was going to make delicious food for her, she immediately put aside the sad things. She smiled and nodded vigorously. "I'll take you there." After that, she stretched out her hands and said coquettishly, "But I want to carry you." Li Yundong loved Su Chan very much. He turned around with a smile, squatted down, and said, "Come on up." Su Chan was shocked when she saw Li Yundong turn around. Oh! There are two obvious black handprints on Yundong's white shirt. Obviously, they were made by her hands that had just touched the mud. Su Chan's heart skipped a beat. She was afraid that Li Yundong would be angry when he saw them. For a moment, she quickly thought about what she should do. She put her hands behind her back and secretly rubbed them, rubbing the mud in her palms. Seeing that Su Chan didn't move, Li Yundong turned around and said with a smile, "What's wrong? You don't want to carry me? Then walk back by yourself." Su Chan said anxiously, "Of course I will." She didn't care about the black handprints on Li Yundong's body and jumped onto his back. She wrapped her arms around Li Yundong's neck, but when she saw that her hands were swaying in front of Li Yundong, she was afraid that Li Yundong would notice, so she grabbed the front of Li Yundong's shirt tightly with both hands, leaving two big black handprints on his chest. Li Yundong had no idea that he had become a clay figurine at this time. He smiled and put Su Chan on his back. "You've gained weight." Su Chan immediately twisted her body when she heard that. "Who's gained weight?" "You're the one who's gained weight. I haven't eaten for days. How can I gain weight? You lied to me." Li Yundong laughed and waved his hand. "Okay, I'm going to make delicious food for you." As he said that, he walked across the stone bridge with Su Chan on his back. One of them was as strong and handsome as a pine tree, while the other was as soft and charming as a green vine. The two figures were tightly pressed against each other. In this ancient landscape painting of a small bridge and flowing water, it was like a golden wind and jade dew meeting, surpassing countless immortal couples in the world. Li Yundong walked across the stone bridge with Su Chan on his back. He suddenly turned around and said softly, "Girl, we'll never be separated again. We'll never let go of each other again, right?" At this time, Su Chan was worried that Li Yundong would lose his temper when he saw her dirty clothes. She rolled her eyes and nodded her head like a chicken pecking rice. Her black hands grabbed Li Yundong's clothes even harder. "Yes, I won't let go even if you beat me to death." At the third watch, another 12,000 words burst forth. You're tuning into the Han Li's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.